We're going to go ahead and get the meeting called to order. Mr. Kimball, if you would call the roll.
Certainly, sir. Let's see. Mr. Ankuma?
Aye.
Okay. Mr. Castillo?
Here.
Ms. Gill?
Aye.
Mr. Lawrence?
Here.
Mr. Reidinger?
Here.
Ms. Ward is not here. And Mr. Webb?
Here.
Great, thank you.
We'll stand for the pledge. Pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to welcome everyone to our first public hearing for the budget. And with that, in accordance with 2.1, public comment. Okay, excuse me. Just was getting one. If I'll entertain a motion to amend the agenda for this evening.
So if I might say this, we are going to, or I would like to propose that the addenda be adopted with the small exception that the recognition of IBE division status move before the public comment, and then we do the public comment and proceed with the rest of the agenda, given the presence of so many people here for that. Thank you.
Second.
Actually, I've got a question.
Yes.
For questions and feedback, 4.01, that is something new that is not provided for in our bylaws. So I think we should take that off today and talk about how we're going to do it, since this was, well, pointed out to us 20 minutes ago.
Any other comment before we, about that? Mr. Randgar?
First off, let me apologize for getting the word out to everyone so late. You are quite right, Mr. Lawrence, that the word should have gone to people before. The subject came up when we were talking about the agenda last week, and I simply failed to send out a note to everyone, and you have my apologies for that. The idea was essentially to, in order to get the public more of a chance to participate in the public comment section, if you will, and because this is a public hearing, to have a second section of what amounts to public comment after the presentations had been given, so that the public could ask any questions or make any comments, also time limited. There's nothing in the bylaws that prohibits it, and Tricia was present, that is the general counsel was present at the meeting where this was discussed and felt it was consistent with the school board policies. That said, I'll follow what the will of the chair and the board is in terms of whether we wish to afford the public an opportunity to comment after the presentations tonight or discuss it first.
Now, my only point is this just for tonight, or is this a change going forward? I mean, when we talked about how to better respond to the public, you know, we sat here and we had a work session about how to do it and how to do it consistently. So my question is, as the board, well, it's not a question, the board hasn't even discussed this. So I think we should remove it and figure out what we want to do with it, rather than do it and then maybe have to yank it back and look like we're not really thinking things out.
In the end, are there any other comment about this before I make any comments about this? Okay. Mr. Lawrence, and I, with Mr. Rangel, would apologize for not necessarily bringing this to the full board's attention. It is not something that is going to be an occurrence or change for the duration. It was an opportunity for the public to give additional comment only during the budget cycle, where we are presenting our different aspects of the budget. With the public listening to those comments and then having an opportunity to ask questions or clarification points after the presentation, where a member of staff or myself or Mr. Ranger would be respond to them. But also, if we do not have a answer at that moment, we would refer to staff and with them given any timely manner of responding back to the public with that clarification or additional information that they may have been asked for with that particular aspect of the budget that we're discussing. I'm okay with pulling this back for tonight and having a conversation about it. But I do think it's a good opportunity for us to engage the public a little bit more within the budget process to make sure that we're hearing them, responding back to them in a timely manner. But
No, I
I'm
think
fine with
the
that.
responding idea is good. We just need to make sure we're not blurring the distinction between a public meeting and a public forum, and they're two very different things, and the public role is very different in both. So, yeah, if we could just have a discussion as the right way to go forward, and if the idea is limit it just to our budget meetings, that could be one way to go forward, but I just think we need to make sure that it's thought out and not tossed on and just hoped for the best.
And we will do that. So if someone would amend the agenda for this evening for that one, and we will, Dr. Schiller, add that for a conversation for a brief conversation for our next board meeting.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Unanimous consent.
And I'm just going to say, if there's nothing else, I'll ask unanimous consent for the amended agenda to be accepted.
Just one clarifying thought, Mr. Chair, and that is, as we have public hearings and work sessions, if we could come up with some conceptual framework for what a public hearing is and what a work session is, I think that would be very helpful.
Okay, we will discuss that as well. I'll ask unanimous consent for approval of the amended agenda. All right, thank you very much. No objection. All right, move on to 2.01. In accordance with school board
Recognition of IB agenda.
Did we move that to public comment? Okay,
Yes.
it didn't move on here. All right. All right, we're gonna go with moving up to the recognition of the IB division. We're going to turn it over to Ms. Sebring.
Yes. Ms. Seabridge, please.
All right, thank you so much for having us here tonight to celebrate the accomplishment with the International Baccalaureate at Falls Church City Public Schools. The IB coordinators from all of the programs are here with me, and they will be presenting on information from their schools to share with you. And I just want to say that we're excited that finally we are now authorized as a middle years program, grades 6 through 10. We've been working on this for 3 years. Our teachers have worked very hard in getting everything in place with our curriculum, with working with pedagogy, and making sure that our kids are getting what they need with their education. We are one of the newest members of the global community, offering the International Baccalaureate Middle Years program in 147 different countries. We are also the first public K-12 IB World School Division in Virginia, and we owe that in many thanks to our IB World educators for all of their hard work in making this a reality at all of our schools. They worked very hard with the PYP program, the diploma program, and also with the middle years program. We're celebrating also 35 years of excellence and expanding opportunities. The IB Vision began in 1981, and this year we sealed that gap in the middle with the middle years program with our authorization. We owe a lot of this to this man, Mr. Olam, who is with us here tonight. So for those of you that aren't aware of this, Mr. Olam was on the school board. And when he was on the school board, and correct me if I'm wrong, he was on a committee that wanted to bring the International Baccalaureate to Falls Church City. And he recommended this to the superintendent at the time. And then afterwards, it just became history. So George Mason has been a diploma program school since 1981, 35 years. So thank you so much, Mr. Olam.
We're going to do it as well, yeah.
Can I have a say and then I'll shut up for the rest?
Yes, you certainly can.
Mr. Olam, you can always have a say.
centennial away, I was one of you, but that was a long time ago. And however, I have been one of your great supporters, although I don't come to meetings. I do it better in another circus where people are wanting to say, do we knock them off this year, or do we raise them up this year, or who's going to decide what happens? I have learned in other areas that when an item is introduced into use, and that item goes and gets very, very good, and then suddenly drops begin to take place. And when that begins to happen, it shows a weakness in the extent to which the people who are around to see what is good and what is more than good. It is excellent. And if you haven't seen this yet, about a year ago, there was a large, good-sized piece of paper from the Senate and from the House of Representatives of the state of Virginia. And if you ever wanted to be congratulated, look at that piece of paper. It's not a piece, it's about like that. And it's located along with the other things that the George Mason School people allowed to happen. You will see what these people, nobody went to them. Anyway, I would try to find out who went to them to tell them what a great thing this was. Somehow or another, they knew. And what a great thing to come at your doorstep on July 4th. And there it was, and I picked it up. I couldn't believe it. Well, it just shows you that there were many other schools that picked up what we did here, and we gave them all the cooperation that they could possibly use. And this is reflective in the kind of message that you will read, and I hope you read it. It's a great thing, and I'm very happy to be here to resound that. It's a great thing to see something that you're involved in when you're little, and you suddenly become pretty big. And I hope you continue to be so, continue to be successful, and remain to be the person that people from other parts of the state have recognized. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to say this, and I hope you keep them well funded as the years go by. Thank you.
Thank you.
And before you potentially take off, Mr. Olam, we here in the Foster City Schools would like to take a moment to recognize you for your leadership in the IB program and give you a little token of our appreciation. And I'll read this. Congratulations, Exceptional Performance Award presented to Lou Olam for outstanding dedication and contributions toward Foster City's public schools becoming a K-12 International Baccalaureate World School Division. And I'll come over and present this to you.
Hello.
We're glad you came here, too.
Lou. Look at me. Mr.
Makes your heart feel good. It really does.
Thank you, Mr. Olam. Who would have thought 35 years later where we would become because of you. So thank you. Okay, so one of the...
That's what happens at 35.
Aw. Hey, you're still young. You're still young. So...
You were only 65 then.
Yeah, that's right. You're just a little one. So one of the big questions is always, why IB? And I think Mr. Olam talked about that a little bit. But one of the things that really kind of resonates with us is that IB is not just a logo. It's the way we do business. It encompasses so many different things. It's our curriculum. It's our collaboration. It's our assessment. It's our pedagogy and instruction. It's the way our kids think. And we want them to think deeper, at a deeper level. It's not about memorization, regurgitation of material, just because they know to pick A on that test instead of B. It's much more than that. It's also about being global citizens and really being caring, and that whole learner profile part that we want all of our young people to grow up with those kinds of attributes and characteristics. So it is that common language. The other thing, it unites us throughout the different programs, whereas before we didn't have that, especially in the middle school area. We had the PYP speaking the language, we had the DP speaking the language, but the middle school is like speaking traditional, and really there was no connection. Now we have that connection. So when those kids come to us from the PYP program, they're going to get that consistency. They're going to know what's expected of them, and they're going to be prepared for that, and they're going to be ready for that. And then they're going to be ready for that diploma program if they choose to go that route. It helps us also with those challenging questions. It's about that deeper thinking and thinking critically. It's about those research skills, those soft skills, those 21st century ones that we really need to have for our children so that when they grow up, they're going to do well in higher education, but just in the workplace. So what's after higher education? They got to go to work. So there's so much more to it than really just a logo. Here are some things, and I'm not going to read this all to you. You guys can read, and everybody will have the presentation, so you can go through this. But these are some of the main things, and notice it's not just about the teaching or the learning. It's for both. It's for the adults, and it's for the students. Our staff and our teachers have grown so much through this process. And you'll see a little bit later that they have written some comments for you to read. So it's inquiry-based, not just for our kids, but it's also for our staff. It's concept-driven. Contextualized. It's rooted in the real world so the kids can make those connections. It's collaborative, not just the collaboration with our children collaborating together, but with our staff. I've been here for 13 years, and there's times when our staff, they were not collaborating. It's like because there was no framework for them to do so. They teach in their classroom, they do their thing, and they try to reinvent the wheel over and over again. But now they have other people that come together, and they're working together, they're working smarter by collaborating. It's differentiated, not only for staff, but for our children as well, because we know our children come to us with different needs, and we try to support those needs. And it's also informed by assessment. Assessment isn't a gotcha. It's not a, we'll take the test, he got 5 of them wrong, so I guess he failed. It's more about mastery. It's like, okay, he doesn't know these 5 questions, so we need to teach him so that that child masters that content. That's the goal of education, is mastery. The other piece of this that I think we need to talk about, and we haven't really addressed this with the board much, but with the VDOE, Dr. Staples has been a lot of discussion around the profile of a graduate. We were looking a little deeper at the profile of a graduate, and what we were noticing is the correlation between IB and the profile of a graduate that we must do in the state of Virginia in each school division, and how all of those things are tied together. So if you look at the bolded items, the bold items, those are the things from the profile of a graduate, and then underneath is the way the IB is connected. Not everything, but just some ideas of how that connection is made for our students. And that's my overview. So now I'm going to turn it over to the coordinator, since I've talked plenty enough. And we're going to start with Jeremy Ferrara, and he is our assistant principal at Mount Daniel and also our PYP coordinator.
Thank you for having us. So at Mount Daniel, one of the things that we are trying to build is build these skills at a young age and build the vocabulary. So we want the students to have a collaborative learning community where they're working together and able to communicate and collaborate with each other. We want the learning to be student-centered and inquiry-based, again, starting at a very young age when you're still learning their letters and learning basic math concepts that they're exploring, not just being told the concepts. And then we also want them looking at things from a more global lens. So they're not looking at things from a narrow local viewpoint, but seeing things globally. So one of the examples here I have up there is, I'm gonna read a few of the quotes of just short blurbs from what we have from from what the teachers sent you. From Nan Hoff, one of our kindergarten teachers, described PYP by 5 and 6-year-olds are naturally curious about the world around them. Inquiry-based teaching and learning creates opportunities for our kindergarten students to wonder about and explore their environment in a meaningful and purposeful way. So a great example of this is our kindergartners take a trip to Mexico, where they actually pretend to get on a flight, and that's them getting on their flight to Mexico. They have boarding passes and everything, and they go to a Mexican market and they explore the market from a different point of view, and it's learning about it as part of their unit, how we express ourselves. So it's a great provocation and opening to the unit and their inquiry into different ways, and again, looking at it from a global perspective, not just looking at it from a local perspective. The second picture up there is Kelly Marple, one of our first grade teachers, describes PYP as an IB school. Students take responsibility for their own learning. They want to work hard, research, and find out about their burning questions, and this structure not only allows them to do so, but encourages it. So first graders start one of their units with no talking day, which is their provocation, where they spend the entire day without being able to speak at all. So they have to think of other ways to communicate. Then they spend the entire unit learning about communication in a global lens. And at the end of the unit, they make videos where they are teaching different communication symbols. And they make up communication symbols that mean different things. And they kind of compare them with different classes, and they try to guess what they've come up with. Also talking about people outside just our kindergarten and first grade, Carolyn Sweterlich, our music teacher, describes PYP as a teacher. PYP gives me the tools needed to implement a constructivist approach and continue growing in my practice. The picture up there on the left is students making instruments out of recycled materials. So this is part of the unit Sharing the Planet. So they're making different musical instruments that fit the music teacher's Virginia standards, but they're doing it using recycled materials. And the last picture on the right there is something new this year. Is we wanted to try to, one of our goals from our visit last year, our evaluation, was to make PYP part of the entire school, not just certain areas of the curriculum. So we wanted to include it into PBIS, which is our behavior intervention program, and the students receive hippo hoorays when they do something where they do something good, around the school, something kind, and they have to one of those different learning traits are checked off as they do it. And we've seen such an incredible, we've only been doing this now for 4 or 5 months, and we've seen such an incredible improvement in the students' understanding of those vocabulary words, which is really the basis as they get older and move through the entire IB program. So it's just, again, trying to make it part of the entire school, not just certain areas of the curriculum. So PYP gives the students a great framework for IB as they begin their journey, moving up through the system, and it's amazing that we're able to have it from K all the way up through 12.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Michelle Harcharik. I am the PYP coordinator and assistant principal at Thomas Jefferson Elementary. I kind of want to speak to you guys from the heart tonight, and you can read what PYP is. You can read when we became a PYP school. I will say the second statement there, because that's really our mission statement, and basically, PYP is, it does allow students to become lifelong learners who strive to make the world a better, more peaceful place. Thinking back, I started in Falls Church 7 years ago as a reading specialist at Thomas Jefferson, and that was my first introduction to PYP. I then went to the middle school where we didn't have MYP at the time, and then I came back 3 years ago as an assistant principal at TJ. And I have to say, I'm gonna, I take a lot of things from all my different positions and my time here, but I think the one thing that I am the most appreciative at this point is the introduction to the PYP, because I don't think that I would have necessarily come across it in my 17 years of teaching. I hadn't come across it yet. So to me, being introduced to that and seeing the potential that it has and what it offers to our students and our teachers, that's just so powerful to me, and it's just something that I'm so happy to be a part of, and I'm so grateful that I, got this experience to be introduced to it. And it really is about, creating those learners who work to make the world a better, more peaceful place, and that's just, in a nutshell, that's what it is. And it's just very powerful. And I've seen a lot of, evolution through the years. There are people who aren't always extremely fond of it, but I really think that has to do with understanding it. PYP is so complex. It's a huge continuum. Actually, IB is a huge continuum that is very murky in a lot of ways, and until you get into it, until you use it, until you talk about it and collaborate, it's something that can be very difficult to understand. It's a framework. I know a lot of people think that it is a program. It is a framework, and it is a framework that I feel that just really is what I think every educator wants and every parent would want for their children. So that's why it's just very, again, something that I'm so grateful to be a part of. We have quotes that we will share with you from the teachers. I'm not going to read all of those, but there are a couple things, some pictures that we have here of students around school. We've really, like I said, we've been involving, one of the biggest evolution or changes that I've seen is the teachers. And as we brought fifth grade in, they were a little bit behind the other grade levels because they were at the middle school for a while. But really seeing their change, their changing mindset and understanding what it means to teach through this framework. And it's really about the bigger picture. And it's going beyond our standards that we have and, getting beyond just the specific content of that particular person in social studies that a child in Virginia needs to know, and really thinking about that global piece and how it connects to everything else, because they may not live in Virginia for the rest of their lives, or, and just helping them to kind of move beyond and just connect everything. And that's really what I see is the teachers being able to connect those big themes of who we are, how we organize ourselves, how the world works. And that's what's really, I think, is so powerful. Just some more pictures, really trying to bring in that international piece. But it's not about international, just being at the top level. And there's recently I've seen a analogy of an iceberg, and lots of times we think of the top level of the iceberg when it comes to culture and thinking about just the different foods and the different clothing and things like that. But there's really so much more to culture, and that's really what we're trying to promote with our students. We're really working on promoting international mindedness this year. We're asking students to kind of see what else is going on in the world and talk about that. We've also implemented a couple things this year. We've always talked about the learner profile traits, but we're really trying to recognize students this year for that, and we've had such a positive response from parents and students in being recognized. And the interesting, the fun thing about it is that the students select their classmate that they feel is a communicator, or they select the student that they feel is most principled, and they can select more than one, so it's not limiting. But I think that's had a really good response. Any more pictures? And this is just some of, some pictures of the students really, thinking about, it's thinking about their work and thinking about what they're doing and how they can connect everything together. So I know lots of times at the beginning of the year, there is a lot of language involved with PYP, and that can kind of trip people up sometimes, but it's just showing the students, how can they connect that to their lessons, and it really connects to their everyday. They can be reflective every time they do something. It's about their creativity. So again, I think it's something that I am truly grateful for having experienced and being a part of.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Laura Lane.
Good evening. How are you? Good. I am, as Jeremy and Michelle were talking, my neurons were firing in my brain because I kept thinking of all these different things that I could say and make connections to. But I'm going to limit myself because sometimes when I talk about IB, I get really excited and I talk forever and ever and ever. And I don't want to do that to you tonight because I know you have a robust agenda. So I'm so excited to be here in Falls Church City. I joined the staff at MEH and GM this August, I guess, so it's been about 5 months. And my previous experience in other school districts, I came from other IB schools and personalized learning schools, so I have the background in both types of frameworks that we are implementing at the schools. And it has just been super wonderful to join a dedicated staff of teachers that really want to grow their practice and do what's best for students in the classroom every single day. I sort of hit the ground running because I came and we had the verification visit in November, and that is a huge thing. And my previous school, just for comparison, I was at the school for full school years prior to having that big meeting. And so I got to know the staff. I had the opportunity to work with all the administrators, provide all the professional development myself, so that I knew exactly how that meeting was going to go. And here, I sort of stepped into it blindly, and the staff was so gracious and just inviting me to their classrooms to see what they're doing, because they were so excited about the progress that they had made with the previous coordinators that had been in place. So we were successful. We found out right when we returned from break, and that was super exciting for everyone to hear. And it's really the culminating event to receive that authorization letter from the IB organization. for all the teachers in grades 6 through 10 who have spent the last 3 years rewriting their curriculum. And I'm sure you're thinking, oh, that's probably a lot of work. And yes, it was, but the curriculum is deeper now. There is more depth added to the SLL content that the state asks us to teach so that the students receive a deeper understanding of what it is they are learning, so then they can apply that outside the classroom and from one classroom to the other. And so I think that that is the heart of what the middle years program is all about. All of the other things that have been mentioned by the PYP coordinators also are a part of the middle years program: service, the learner profile attributes. There's a huge emphasis on language learning. I'm sure you're all aware of that, and the international mindedness, but really that collaboration, student-centered piece where we're developing a conceptual-based curriculum for our students to experience. We do have some next steps. We've achieved our kind of our big thing that we wanted to get this year, but there are some next steps, because when you are working on becoming an IB World School, you have to do about a third of the things they want you to do up front, and then you continue to build an action plan and work on the additional things. So if you have not had the chance to see our verification visit report yet, I'm sure that Ms. High will share that with you all. But it did have some lovely commendations about the school district, as well as a few recommendations for things for us to continue to work on. So a couple of those things, we've got some continued professional learning to take place at the middle school and the high school around some very specific topics. We are going to kick off the MYP Personal Project, which is a culminating project for our students in grade 10. We're going to start it this spring, with our grade 9 students. And Gabriel, who I see here today, I just met with him about a week ago. He actually completed a personal project at his previous school and is going to share his project with all of our current freshmen coming up here pretty soon. And so very excited about that. Interdisciplinary learning, we've got some teachers that have begun working on that, but we've got a little bit more work to do in that area. Most recently, I can think we have a team of 7th grade individuals and societies or social studies teachers and language and literature teachers that are working on building a new interdisciplinary unit, and they are so excited about it. They asked if they could skip PD in February to stay back and work on it, and so I told them we would talk later. And then we're going to continue to build upon the service learning framework that has been put in place at both of the schools as well, so that those frameworks can reach all students and not just students that are participating in Flex or in clubs. I included just on the next slide just two really things that have been really exciting for me since I've been here. We had a CERT training in September of 2016, and you can see we have 4 of our teachers from the middle school and the high school, and they are building something. And so when we are planning our professional learning, which is part of my role, we are modeling the MYP pedagogy for the teachers that we then want them to take back into their classroom. So it's not set and get, which is the kind of the boring phrase for PD. We are actually trying to get them involved in hands-on learning opportunities. We do it in-house, and sometimes we send them out. But Mr. Coast and I have been working really hard this year to provide those hands-on learning opportunities. The other thing just came out today, and I think I saw Mr. Kelly come in. Mr. Kelly is one of the newspaper advisors for MEH, and this just came out, I guess, on Friday, is an article, and I got interviewed by a student a couple weeks ago for this newspaper. I didn't even really know what the article was about. She just asked me about some MYP things, and there's a link there to the full article so that you can see it. But it brought tears to my eyes this morning as I read it, and I let Mr. Kelly know, and Ms. Swain, who was the other advisor, let them know that happened, because the student, this 8th grade student, explained the middle years program in such a clear way for other students in the school to understand it. I hope you'll take the time to read it, because she did a much better job than I would be able to do to explain it to 12, 13, and 14-year-olds. So I hope you have the opportunity to read that later.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Coast. I started with IB work in 1997 as a biology teacher, IB biology in Fairfax County. Now, you got to know, at that time, I had taught in Charles County, Maryland for 15 years, and I was the very best biology teacher that ever existed in my head. And when I came over and got involved with IB, I was humbled, because I realized how much professional growth was still awaiting me. I loved the program so much. I taught it for 7 years, and then the school asked me to become the IB Diploma Program Coordinator. I believe in this program wholeheartedly, not only to help kids grow and become better learners, but staff as well. And I'm a living example. I really grew tremendously under the requirements of the IB program for me to run a classroom, to assess students, and provide meaningful learning opportunities. I grew tremendously. And I've seen that ever since as an IB Diploma Program Coordinator. I've been able to work with teachers in all disciplines. And I see it all the time. This is a program that helps kids and it helps teachers grow to be better. As an IB Diploma Program Coordinator, we always bring back our graduates. And our graduates are the best testimony that you could ever have. I've been to IB trainings, I've been to IB networking, I've been to IB conferences, I've read the IB literature. So in some ways, I'm a little bit brainwashed with how powerful IB can be. But the real proof of the pudding is what the kids come back and tell us about how IB prepared them for college success. We talk about the IB learner profile. I'll tell you, it's real, it's living, it's how teachers must drive their instruction and how IB assesses their students, and therefore how teachers must assess. I love the IB learner profile, and the example I just gave to a group of sophomores today. If you were, for example, to write an IB history, paper 2, there's 26 essays, and you're expected as a student to address 2 of them. So you don't have to know everything in 20th century world topics, but you certainly want to be well versed, at least with 2, because you're going to have to write a thesis statement and support it with a lot of opinions, facts, and you can even ask questions. In the IB learner profile, you're not asked just to be knowledgeable about the topic you've selected, though you need to be knowledgeable to write about it. But you also, in the course of writing that answer, you have to show balance, reflection. You have to be an inquirer. Example: suppose you get a prompt that says, "How did Hitler rise to power in Germany in the 1930s?" Well, now you decide to write about that. Your thesis is what it is, and you develop it with some nice facts and figures from that time period. But you're going to have to also be very balanced in your approach. You're going to have to say what was Russia thinking, what was the Brits, the Americans, the French, as well as what was happening inside of Germany at that time. You have to be reflective on how the different practices that occurred after World War I led to the rise of the Third Reich in Germany in the 1930s, where a man like Hitler could even come to power. You can be an inquirer when you write your answer. What would happen if after World War I the powers did this and changed the economy of Germany as it had a better chance to grow? How would that influence Hitler's ability to rise to power? You can ask a question in your answer. So when you saw the learner profile earlier, I want you to know it's very real. It drives the way we teach, and it drives the way the kids learn, and it drives the way we have to assess kids. You guys are sitting on a gold mine in this city. I can tell you, you're K through 12. Just today, I had a parent from Singapore approach me via email. We're coming to your area. We've heard wonderful things about your IB program. How can we make this transition work for our daughter? Another student today from Denmark contacted me via email saying, my family's moving there after my first year of IB in Denmark, and we want to come to your school. What's the transition look like with coursework? These are just 2 examples from today. This is a weekly event for me where I get contact from families overseas looking to move to Falls Church City. You guys rank in the top 1% on the Newsweek Challenge Index developed by Jay Matthews. It's in large part because of the number of IB exams and a little bit of the AP exams that we give. The challenge rankings based on the fact that so many of our students are challenging themselves with external examinations relative to the size of our graduating class. We're in the top 1% of schools nationally based on that IB program that Lou, you so wonderfully had the insight to bring in 1981, as I was just finishing college. So good. So Amy is our director of counseling, and she wrote me a quote. I've only been here in this city doing IB since September 1st. I finally got on board here. But she's been here a while, and the experiences I just shared with you about families wanting to come here, she can give you testimony after testimony after testimony of families that have moved to this district. I know there's a budget hearing. If you're looking at the cost of certain programs, I tell you IB money is money well spent. You have a lot of high quality families and students looking to move to this school district because of the IB program. It's powerful. You have a gym here. I hope you continue to support it. I'm passionate about it, and I'm passionate about it because my students who've gone through my programs that I've had the ability to run have come back and told me as much.
I just want to mention just briefly, I know we're running over in time, is that all of our coordinators wear many hats. They're not just coordinators. We have assistant principals as coordinators. Our coordinators, like Dan is also the GT specialist at the high school, and he runs the AP coordination for all the assessments. The MYP and DP are both counselors. They counsel students on which courses to take, colleges to go to. So they wear many, many hats. So we have to look at that piece of it as well with what's on their plate to do every day to help our kids. So quick question, where do we go from here? Some people say, well, now you're IB K-12, it's over. We don't have to, we're done, okay. No, it's never done, okay? So basically we need to continue to strive for that excellence, and by doing that, we have to have continual reflection about our teaching, our learning practices, and then we have to do our revision. It's that cycle that keeps on looping and looping, and once we fall out of that cycle, we stagnate and we don't strive for excellence anymore. So it's an ongoing process, and then every 5 years, we are reevaluated by the IB. They come and they check on our program to make sure that we are following best practices, make sure we're doing what we should be doing, and then they give us recommendation and good feedback so that we can grow as professionals. And they'll tell us, like, you know, you guys are doing really, really great here, but you really need to work on this, and this will be better for you, for your kids, and for your teachers to grow. So it's that continual practice that we never want to give up. I want to share this with you. On the board docs are the SCCPS staff comments. There is a huge list of comments from our IB World educators in the division, all the way from kindergarten up to 12th grade. They are sharing how they feel this transition, like for MYP being only 3 years, or PYP or DP, how it's impacted their pedagogy and their teaching, and how they've seen that impact with their students. So I encourage you, I know it's a lot of reading, maybe over a period of days, but please try to go through and read those comments. They're really worth reading. I was like floored by some of the things I read, because I remember 3 years ago, especially with the MYP when we started this process, and you know how it is with change. Change is never easy, so the look on their faces when we told them we were going here, it was priceless. So do you want to mention this a little bit?
Sure. So I just took the staff comments and put them into a word cloud. And the way that the software works is that the words that are repeated over and over get bigger and bigger as it gets input into the cloud. So you can see that the staff talked a lot about students and learning, and global are kind of and connections are our biggest words. And I just thought it was really telling that students was the largest word, and it appeared in the center when I copied and pasted all of the comments into the software, because all three IB programs are truly a student-centered approach to teaching and learning. And so they are the heart and soul of the IB.
Thank you. All right, and then here are just some other reference items. So if you really want to learn more about the programs and what they mean, and some other information, like I know there's a question about inclusion, you know, and making sure that all kids are getting what they need out of the program. I put that on there as well. So if you want to educate yourselves, and the public wants to educate themselves more about the International Baccalaureate and that it's not just a logo, then there's a whole lot of resources there. This QR code, anybody that wants the presentation right now doesn't want to search for it on the IB docs, if you do that, you can get the presentation. And that's it in a nutshell. We're done. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank each of you very much for all that you've done to get us to this point, and will continue to be doing over the days, weeks, and months to come. Are there any questions, Mr. Nkuma?
Mrs. Seabridge, could you share that with us the old-fashioned way?
Yes.
Not the war.
It's okay. We are differentiating. It's also in board docs. Yes, it's there.
Okay.
It's all good.
Are there any other questions?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to note that the World Economic Forum is going on in Davos, Switzerland right now, and the little pony that powers my computer is getting tired. But there was a panel selection, and there was a panel today on the future of work, and I don't believe that education is all about work, because I think we have to build good citizens as well. And there was an interesting list of projected top 10 skills in 2020. It's very similar in 2015, but if you look at what the consensus is about what's really important, it's not reading, writing, and arithmetic. It's complex problem solving, critical thinking, creativity, people management, coordinating with others, emotional intelligence, judgment and decision making, service orientation, negotiation, and cognitive flexibility. All those things are the hallmark of what IB offers. And so I think we are very fortunate to have Mr. Olam's foresight, and I think seeing some very coincidental thing like this tells me that we really are on the right track.
Definitely, no doubt.
Other questions or comments?
I have a comment.
Ms. Ward?
Talking. I just want to thank you all for all of your hard work. And I know as a teacher myself, I know that we all work beyond our contract hours, but I know as IB specialists, you are totally putting in a lot of hours, and certainly you're not doing it for the money, you're doing it for the love of the program, and you believe in it, and that's very clear. And I really appreciate you even taking the time this evening to come out here and make your presentations. Thank you so much.
For that.
Anyone else?
Just briefly,
Mr. Heininger.
I wanted to offer my thanks, not just to the coordinators, but to the staffs of all the schools and everyone who had a role in this. I look behind the row of IB coordinators and PYP coordinators, and I see Mr. Sharp, a member of the City Council and the school board, led these many years. And I think this is an outcome of a commitment of literally 35 years of effort. And I think it is a huge accomplishment. I think more people had a role in this than you could possibly describe. But my kids, have been lifers in Falls Church City. They started at Mount Daniel before it was actually a PYP school, and went up and watched the transitions to PYP at Mount Daniel, Thomas Jefferson, and then Mary Ellen Henderson. And it's been a great thing for them. I just can't offer enough thanks for the work that you've all put into this, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
1981.
So what we're going to do is for each of the schools, we're going to give recognition for each of you, and I'll read this briefly. Congratulations, Exceptional Performance Award presented to, and I'm going to read each of the school, Mount Daniel Elementary School IB World Educator, Thomas Jefferson Elementary School IB World Educator, Mary Ellen Henderson Middle School IB World Educator, and George Mason High School World Educator for outstanding dedication and contributions towards Falls Church City Public Schools becoming a K-12 International Baccalaureate World School Division. And thank you all very much for all that, and I'll come down and present them to you.
Thank you so much.
You can do one of those things yourself, too. I'll present to you tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. We're going to move on and move to public comment. In accordance with School Board Bylaw 2.30, the time for each speaker is limited to 3 minutes. Additional written statements may be submitted to the clerk for dissemination to the board, to board members, and for the record. As right now, we just have one comment. Oh, excuse me. Two. The first one is from, first speaker will be Amanda Blanchard. Welcome, Ms. Blanchard.
You can just pull up a chair.
It didn't hurt green.
Grab a chair.
Oh.
Just to make it
I
even more
can if
complicated.
that makes it easier for the lovely mics. Good evening. Amanda Blanchard. I am here representing the Falls Church City Education Association this evening. Just sharing some thoughts. Thank you, Dr. Schiller, for coming and speaking to all of our buildings. I was not at all of them, but I was at the middle and high school. And I can share with you, I think the biggest takeaway is just, I think staff are a little disappointed, not at the presentation and not from the information, but that salary staff employment improvements basically were given the back seat. And that's a little scary for them. They feel as if it's not, their options were given, but it wasn't necessarily presented as if it's going forward, that it's still a potential that a step would not happen or salary improvements would not happen. And I think that's scary for them in terms of our commitment to taking care of our staff. We know that education is not a business, but I saw something the other day that really kind of hit home. You don't have to worry about customer service if you take care of your staff, because if your staff feel happy, they feel secure, they feel well taken care of, they will take care of your customers. And our customers are students, everyday students, all the time students, at night students, on weekends students. And I think that they are feeling more and more as if we are not potentially keeping up if we don't afford them a step this coming season and include that as a priority on the many, many items that you will discuss in the next month and a half to 2 months. So that being said, as we move forward, do keep that in mind, and I will be here advocating for them and with them to make sure that that is a priority moving forward. So, thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mr. Farrell Kelly.
Hello. Hi. I won't take much of your time. Ms. Lane actually kind of stole my thunder. I'm here to keep an eye on and find out about the budget process. But I more wanted to just call everybody's attention to the new school newspaper at Mary Ellen Henderson, of which we are all very, very proud. It's pretty much an entirely student-driven effort. 2 8th graders came to me about a month and a half ago and asked, we have a literary magazine, why don't we have a newspaper? And my response was, because nobody's ever asked me about that question before. So when do you want to start? And they have taken the reins. It's entirely extracurricular. We don't have an encore block for it, but if you take the chance to take a look at it, it's available on the front page of the MEH website and was out in the morning announcements this morning. I think you'll find that it's pretty impressive. And what's more, it's sort of appropriate that it came out this week because it, I think, perfectly aligns with, the IB philosophy. The students chose the articles that they wanted to research. They did the research, and you can't get more sort of inquiry-based than that. So that's all. I hope you'll take the chance to take a look at it. We're going to be coming out with new editions monthly, and we're very excited to see where they go. Ms. Swain and I have had nothing but pleasant times. It's been incredibly stress-free for an opening, in part. Well, not just in part, but totally because of the kids' utter dedication. And now that this first issue is out, in addition to the 11 folks who contributed to the original, to this edition, we've had, just scads of kids coming and saying, what can I do? I want to do one too. I want to do an article as well. So I'm afraid it's going to turn into quite a thick news magazine before it's all through. But anyway, please take a look, and we would love to hear your feedback as well. It's something I think the students are tremendously proud of, and we're very proud of them for their hard work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, we will move on into the work session, and the first topic tonight will be following up on a great presentation talking about our IB program. We'll be talking about the budgetary impacts of the program. And I will turn over to Dr. Schiller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We thought it appropriate that there's always been questions since I've been here, and you've been hearing for a long, how much does the IB program cost us? So I charged staff not too long ago, like maybe 24 hours ago.
Not even.
Not even, okay. That's why Lisa is in here. She's with her mom. But
Just saying.
Ms. Seabridge and Hunter and I have been working through this until just about bell time here. And what we've been trying to do is really give an honest appraisal of where are the costs as associated. Questions have come up to me as recently as today from people who are associated with the district but not necessarily or not staff members. So here is a very quick overview of our costs as you would appropriate. And Jeannie, perhaps you can help me work through this. But ladies and gentlemen, as you know, all school districts look for a way to provide professional development in a variety of different areas to their staff. Whether it be training in mandated areas, whether it be for special education, whether it be for program, curriculum, pedagogy. We see that we are spending for our entire division $42,850 in professional development, which is a woeful number. I will tell you that. That does not simply limit itself to what we do in IB. If you did not have an IB program, I would venture to say there would be no change in that cost because you would have to substitute some form of professional development. Jean, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think you summed it up pretty well. It's like you can't really count that, in my opinion, as an IB cost because even if we didn't have IB, we would have to spend that, and we really should be spending more to give the teachers, the PD that they really do need. We've been doing a whole lot of Band-Aid approach on PD, by trying to give them things, but we're a small division. We don't have the resources the bigger division has, so sometimes we really do have to send our teachers out to get real good quality PD. We don't have a choice, or we have to pay a bigger dollar to bring people in to provide that PD. So something definitely you want to think about. It's not IB.
It does cost an annual membership fee per school. And Jeannie has identified here that our total program costs are a shade under $37,000. Now, going through the evaluation program, the reevaluation program, obviously has a cost impact. The other alternative was you'll be a member of the Southern Associations of Colleges and Schools. And going through a SACS accreditation and visits, as many of you have experienced or know about, that's estimated at $6,000 a year. Yes, it does cost more for the IB program, but trust me, having been affiliated with all the and the head of these kinds of assessment divisions in the Midwest and in the Middle States, that the type of rigor and the type of value that you get going through your IB program evaluation is much more valuable, and the return on investment is much more significant.
I just want to add, we did SACS-CASI for a while, and we found it was always, all the work was on us, and we got nothing out of it. And it just cost us a whole lot of money. And I know I was talking to Mr. Kelly about that earlier, and he's like, yeah, I remember that. So at least now we're getting some kind of feedback, we're getting guidance, we're getting a framework, and we are, every 5 years, they come back and they tell us, what can we do to improve? How can we sustain that cycle? And before we weren't getting that, and I know you know as well as I do, there was a big evaluation we did last year on the ESOL program. The expense of just that one evaluation was humongous. So if you think of that compared to what we're paying for these fees, it's just a drop in a bucket. And we're getting much more out of this than we did even from that evaluation.
You met our staff just a few moments ago, and one of the things that we debated this afternoon is how to present this. I learned something. I did not realize that at George Mason and at the middle school that your IB coordinator wears many hats. So to say that you have a full-time IB coordinator, I think is a misstatement. And I would proffer to you that the other responsibilities that include the coordination of your AP program, the Gifted and Talented program, the Governor's School, and it goes on here. You can see, and so I would submit to you that if you did not have the IB program, you would still need at least a half-time person who's going to coordinate all these other programs. So I would argue that you really do not have two full-time IB coordinators. At best, I would call 1/2, a 0.5. Similarly, you have an assistant principal in 2 schools. You work out the fraction. Mm-hmm. Some of you are in those schools. I think you would probably see that you're working at well over a 1, given all their diverse responsibilities. And our standard staff costs for But that number we have here is what we generally would ascribe to with the benefits and the cost for the salary for a half. And the exams. Yes, this school board, fortunately, pays for the exams for the IB, and that runs $114,000 a year. So yes, that's an additional cost. So I would support and say to you that from what we've looked at and scoured through the budget, Hunter, did we leave anything out that you know of?
No, we didn't. And actually, the total staff cost, the 166, represents a 1.5 FTE. So really, it would be
less than that. I'm sorry.
Than that,
Again, I pressed these people to put this together. I apologize for that oversight.
And the only other thing that I would add in terms of working with Jeannie and other staff, in terms of the IB exam expenses, again, if we didn't do IP exams, we'd be paying for a greater number of AP exams or some other sort of exam where we have to pay for that because we require it of the students.
And so it's required by law, just so everybody understands.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Hunter, can I just ask you a question
Surely.
about this total cost? So essentially that total cost, we really should deduct from that the additional AP exam expense as well as the SACS expense, or has that already been taken out?
Well, and I'll let Jeannie help chime in here because I think part of the concept in putting the chart together is to say, okay, here's IB, and here's the cost that we can assign to it and the staff. If we didn't do this, however, what would need to be in its place?
And we would.
So it would include, professional development. We would have to do some sort of professional development.
So then, I guess, Jeannie, I should be asking you, then this $359,000 is actually, in effect, lower when we consider what we would have to do in lieu of the IB?
Yeah, if we ended up getting rid of the DP program and not having those assessments, the increase in other assessments would go up, probably AP
Exactly.
and so on. So you're going to have it factor out, in that way. Plus, we need those roles for the coordinators to fulfill. Even without an IB program, we need to do PD, and we need to have some kind of accountability with accreditation, whether it's IB accreditation or it's SACS accreditation. We need some kind of accreditation so that we can keep.
So it sounds like that 359 would be a lot lower, I mean, the difference. I'm looking at the difference. How much more are we paying for IB versus, what we would be doing otherwise?
You could almost subtract the PD from that.
Well, I would argue the PD shouldn't be in here because everything we do in PD is everything we do. It's pedagogy. And everything we do under pedagogy is IB philosophy. So, but we would do it without it. We still have to do PD. So.
Okay, but to put on the devil's advocate hat, training for IB PD would displace other PD options. So I guess some of this comes down to why PD and not something, why IB PD and not something
Not
else.
necessarily, because the IB training that we do isn't just IB philosophy. The IB training we do is grounded in the content area. So when we send our teachers to IB training, it's math specific or it's English specific. It's based on their content area, so it's not just a philosophy. And we send our special ed teachers to inclusion training. We send our ESOL teachers to languages. So there's a whole, our administrators go and they get trained on being better leaders. So no, I would say that it doesn't take away from other training.
Mr. Nkuma?
Can I suggest we remove this and have you go back and map out IB, AP, and then net it out for a better, because I think we're just playing with numbers here. And the best way to do it would be to put them side by side and see what the net effect is. Because what I'm hearing is this is not a zero-sum game. Maybe it's a zero-sum game, I'm not sure. But if the money's not spent on IB, it will be spent someplace else. So it's not fair to label IB as costing X amount of dollars. Clearly, this number's wrong.
I agree with
so
you.
let's
I don't
have it
think
done
it's
some
fair.
other way and remove this chart and bring us a revised chart at some later point. That's my suggestion.
No, I think it's a good starting point, and it was good to have the discussion.
Thank
So
you.
now we know it helps you frame like what questions do we want to ask next and how do we want to present it. So thank you for putting it together at the last minute.
Well, it certainly made me an inquiry-based.
And are there any other questions from anyone? Before adding on, I guess Mr. Castillo made the comment, and I guess I've asked a question before. I'm not sure if it's a Virginia law that requires the payment of those testing things, because I don't even know if every jurisdiction in the state pays those or not. So I always wonder about that part of it.
Well, and it's not.
Or is it our?
Well, here's the deal. It's not necessarily. It's not a Virginia law specifically. You must pay for IB exams. But the fact of the matter is that because we have this program embedded in, as basically our GT program, and if you want to take upper level classes, this is what we're offering, and exams are part of that. We cannot pass the expense on to parents because basically in providing a free and appropriate public education for these students, we're saying here's the courses you need to take, and by the way, these exams are part of that, and that's part of their education.
And that's because of being an IB diploma school versus just being AP makes a difference in that regard.
And we pay for AP exams as well.
Yeah.
It's based on an attorney general's opinion, and the attorney general's opinion actually is about AP. But basically, the reasoning of the opinion is if it's required as part of the program, be it AP or IB, then it has to be paid for by the division.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. We will move on to our next topic. A review of cutbacks and impacts on the FY17 budget.
A little while ago, I asked staff to work with principals and to trying to determine what was the impact that you've experienced as a consequence of the cutbacks last year in the budget. And what Lisa and Hunter and staff have put together is this listing and a cogent explanation of what the impact of the reduction was. And you've had this for a period of time to be able to look through. I don't need to walk it through. We are ready to answer any questions. But I do think it's important that people realize that when you cut a sizable amount of money from a budget like last year, that those cuts do have impact, programmatic and on personnel.
And Dr. Schiller, and also I took the liberty of just making a few notes here and some takeaways. After I reviewed the list, because it was very telling. In many areas, to be honest, there was no impact. For example, the annual donation that we were making to the Falls Church Education Foundation, we no longer had to do that because the Education Foundation has become much more financially robust and is now, serving the purpose for which it was intended. We were able to realize savings in our insurance costs, and that was just by putting them out to bid. Our retiree health insurance payments that we made into the trust fund, those were actuarial payments that we were able to realize as well. So really, in terms of programmatically and staff-wise, they had no impact. Others have impacts that have to do with, I think, long-term planning and also short and long-term risk. I'm thinking specifically of like the lease purchase of the school buses. I think it was don't get me wrong, I think it was a very good move to move towards the lease purchase of the school buses. However, what that means now, instead of putting money in for one bus every year, we're now going to have to spread those payments out into the future and commit funds in future budgets towards that. Also, the contingency, bringing the contingency down. We've been fortunate this year. We still have about $100,000 left. We started the year with slightly over 150. But and I know this is an area where the board has discussion every year, at least 2 or 3 times, and during the budget, just in terms of what is an appropriate amount, what could possibly happen, these sorts of things. And I think especially as we begin to trim in other areas and hope for the best, I would hope at some point the board would go back and revisit the contingency as well. I think in terms of the reductions of staff, the obvious big impact there was in fact class sizes. That some of the class sizes are currently larger than they might have been otherwise had we been able to add the staff we had hoped to add. In terms of the reductions that were made to the various pay plans, whether that was the teacher scale, the leadership scale, the stipends, it did have an impact in a couple of ways. One, competitiveness. We did slip a little bit in terms of our teacher competitiveness with Arlington, and also given the fact that for the past 2 years, support staff have received steps only without any adjustments to those scales. We've provided information to show that in fact where we used to be like a 1 and a 2, we're now a 2, a 3, or a 4 in terms of regional competitiveness. A huge impact on morale, to be honest, in terms of listening to the employees and the employee groups who are grateful for what they got, but on the other hand, when the health insurance increased significantly for many staff members, their take-home pay is less this year than it was the previous year. Dues and memberships, we thought this was an easy no-brainer, at least I did, and I thought, well, we'll just cut back. Got a call from Amy Kurjanowicz. One of the casualties of this cut was membership in high school guidance associations, which is a very valuable resource for the high school and also an area where they have publications. Also, what we're finding with the dues and memberships is, and for example, with the National School Board Association, if you're not a member, if you turn around and want to go to a conference, it's going to end up costing you more money to go to that conference. And lastly, in the areas of materials and supplies, we'll talk about that later. That has really, I think, between last year and this year, I think we've kind of, at least by analysis, indicates we've kind of reached a turning point there. So those were my takeaways.
Okay. Are there any questions? Mr. Lawrence.
Well, not so much a question, just pointing out as you go through here, I mean, you look at the costs, but then when you look at the words, students are impacted through a loss of guided reading time, significantly impacted quality of program for students, class sizes increase, specialists do not have the same personal connection with each class, some people are paying annual dues and memberships out of their own personal funds, result in one classroom not being equitable as compared to other classes. I mean, it's not just, well, they had to pay more for snacks on their own. I mean, this is something that's affecting the teachers, it's, affecting central office morale, and it's hitting the students. I mean, that's the bottom line, is we can't pretend that having to cut this $1 million last year didn't affect the students this year. So that's really the bottom line we need to keep in our minds.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Mr. Castillo?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. One question about the security cameras. My recollection was there were going to be some cameras donated, and is this net? The donations were still not enough?
Correct, Mr. Castillo. We did receive the donations. We're very, very grateful for those. However, given the number of cameras and the needs of the school system, and we try to meet the need as best we can, but there's a lot of need out there.
And that has a potential safety or security impact, or are the unreplaced cameras still operational?
There are older cameras in place that are not as reliable as others, and they do deteriorate over time.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? We will review of materials and supplies
Yes.
for FY18.
That gives us a segue, moving from the cutbacks to, I asked again, pushing staff hard here to put a lot of stuff together for us and for your consideration. Wanted to see where we stood with student instructional materials and supplies, particularly over a 7-year period, and to what extent there's equity among the schools, and to what extent you can see and will be able to make a stronger argument of what we need in order for our teachers to be able to have what they need in order to go forward in the classrooms to the highest level possible. There are some you've had a chance to read through all this school by school, and also Hunter was good enough to be able to differentiate a little bit of what each of the schools receive and how they use it. Hunter, you want to do a highlight here, or should we just open it to questions?
Could I just ask one question to help explain before you start explaining? On the first page of this thing, in the right where it is the column is titled SW, is that system-wide?
That is system-wide.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is there any significance to the fact that there are 5 different sizes of X's?
There is, in fact, a significance to that, which
Okay,
I'll be
then
happy
I'll
to speak
get out
to.
of the way and you can explain.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence, and thank you for noticing the size of the X's. I was going to see if anybody would pick up on that. Essentially, went back into our finance system and pulled data on materials and supplies spending that are impacted on a per-student basis. So what this means is that the school buildings, it would be the classroom supplies in regular ed, special ed, CTE, STEAM, gifted, ESOL, library materials, guidance materials. Again, more students, you need more materials. Some of the office materials, more students equals more materials. So that was really what was included in this. Those things that need to be purchased, the consumables every year that are really driven by the number of students you have. The spending per student at every location has decreased over the past 7 years for a number of reasons. One, for various reasons, the budgets have been decreased from time to time, whether it was the recession in 2009-10, whether it was a conscious decision that we need funds in other areas and that we'll just simply have to make do with less materials and supplies, but the budgeted amounts overall have decreased. At the same time, our number of students has been increasing at all locations, and therefore you're taking a stagnant or shrinking number and dividing it by a greater number of students, coming out with a smaller amount per student. Mr. Castillo likes to remind us inflation it's a huge impact. And going back and looking at the Washington-Baltimore Consumer Price Index over the past 7-8 years, it's a 12.5% difference that you've lost in buying power over that period. So your buying power has decreased as a result of the inflation.
In addition to the nominal decrease in dollars.
Correct. And then the analysis, I show it both ways, the nominal dollars and then the inflation-adjusted dollars. And interestingly enough, one of the biggest factors that comes into play, and one location in particular, has to do with the grade reconfigurations between and among the schools. Cutting to the chase, it appears that what happened when the 5th grade moved back to TJ, the funding for materials and supplies did not follow the students as a result, and they were basically budgeted for 3 grade levels. They now picked up 4 grade levels, and
how did that happen? I mean, it just seems like somebody would have noticed in 5th grade.
Well, we notice now. Anyway, in terms of the chart and what's included in each location's budget, you will notice that the spending per student varies right now significantly, or does vary between each location. And this is for a number of reasons. TJ, simply because it really appears that they did not get the funding along with the 5th grade. George Mason appears to be abnormally high at first pass, except if you look at the chart and go to the GM column and say, okay, what's in the GM budget? Well, for example, at George Mason for student activities, given the number of clubs and teams and those sorts of things and activities, that the larger X means that at George Mason, the student activities supply budget is significantly larger than it is at other buildings for a very logical reason. Likewise, there is computer software that is very specific, like to the high school. For example, like the Turnitin software, things like that, which they don't have at other schools. Both Mary Ellen Henderson, George Mason, and system-wide have textbook budgets specifically. In fact, the lion's share of the textbook budget is actually in the system-wide curriculum area, and that is for adoption of textbooks and materials. So there is a reason why the X's are larger, and also under GM, it's the only location where we specifically budget for athletic supplies. So hence those areas are driving up the per student materials and supply expense in those locations.
So athletic supplies are included here?
Yes.
In instructional materials and supplies? Okay, for every school or just GM?
GM is the only school that has a specific line item for athletic supplies. Given the thing is, those are funded by collecting student fees, the pay to play. So that's the funding source there behind those athletic supplies. There are PE and other sorts of supplies in the other buildings, but and for example, the PE program at George Mason, when we buy supplies there, that comes out of regular ed supplies. That does not come out of student activities, athletics. Athletics is the teams.
Okay.
So, Hunter, I'm sorry, I'm not following quite what you said.
Yeah, okay.
So I get that there's a separate line item for George Mason athletics, and I remember looking at that last year, and we talked about things, and actually it was on the thing that we just went through in terms of the cuts that we made last year. But the athletic supplies for the teams are not included in the dollars that are presented here.
They are included in the dollars.
But so this is gross and not net?
This is the amount that is expended every year. That if you pull our books and you run how much we spent on student supplies, this is part of that number.
So it includes the athletic fees.
Yeah, we include the athletic fees in our income side,
Revenue,
right?
in our revenue.
So that's so the athletic fees are included in our revenue, and the expenses are included in the expense side.
And if I can
Okay,
intuit
so-
where you're going, yes, we can parse those out.
So let's just say this is gross and not net.
Correct.
And this is a slight departure. Has an analysis been done of any appropriate savings from the deployment of the personalized learning initiative and technology in particular in terms of reduced costs for paper and those sorts of things?
And the answer there is yes. And under the first bullet, we do, in putting budgets together, adjust from year to year to reflect actual spending. So this, would include, savings from efficiencies as well as other areas where we specifically know certain items are going up.
Understood, but it would be helpful to understand when you get to the recommended changes, whether that's been addressed in the recommendations that you've made.
Okay, very good. So we've got all this data. What do we do with it? I took an initial pass at it. Dr. Schiller did. A couple of other people have weighed in. In moving forward, thought, well, let's just start somewhere and throw out a proposal, which would be to bring the school budgets back to their FY15, FY16 per student levels, and then also make a separate adjustment for enrollment and for TJ, because given the situation there. In doing so, it would carry a price tag of about $114,000, which is hefty. But it would also mean that all locations' materials and supply budgets would increase by various amounts. And there would every location would get additional funds as a result of that. Dr. Schiller,
That'll take you back to your 2015 level.
Okay. And everybody's still better off.
Questions, other additional questions? Mr. Lawrence?
Now, student instructional materials and supplies includes office supplies, clinic supplies. So this includes all the front offices for all the schools too, right?
Basically, think of your school building, okay, and all the supplies in that building that you need to purchase based on the number of students you have. So yes, the clinic, more kids, more Band-Aids, more students, more whatever, papers or Friday folders or what have you.
Okay. I guess where I'm going with, well, I'm not a guess where I'm going. I'm going to why don't we include central office here? Because it seems like you've got all the front offices, but central office is sort of left on its own, and I don't know where we would include that.
Well, to the extent that there is spending that impacts students directly, that is budgeted system-wide as part of the central office budget, if you will, there are, and it's predominantly, well, it's all in the budgets that Lisa and Jeannie control and work with, and work with the principals over, which has to do with textbook, instructional materials and supplies, system-wide things. Honestly, in terms of the central office and other sorts of materials and supplies or whatever, it's not so much for us students necessarily as it is staff. And honestly, right now we've gone to issuing paychecks electronically or pay stubs electronically. We push information out not on paper but over the internet. So really, as Mr. Reidinger was pointing out, we have been able to achieve efficiencies. At the CO, but the things included under the system-wide budget, which one could consider, well, that's in the central office, that are directly related to students and numbers of students, have been included in that column and in the last category on the page.
Okay, so your 114 doesn't completely ignore central office, but it doesn't take all of central office into consideration either.
That's fair.
That is correct.
Okay.
Really, it's that which is driven by the kids, the students.
Right. Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out how much isn't taken into consideration. Because it seems like central office is always the one that's left behind. It seems like to a certain extent we're doing that again here. And I think we've neglected to focus on central office for way too long. So I'm just trying to get a handle as to how much, what's the percentage of all central office expenses for supplies and materials that aren't in here?
And to be honest, from my cursory running through the list and categorization, I would say that in recent years, where the greatest need has been system-wide and in the central office has been in the area of technology, whether that's purchasing licenses to for certain safety programs or security programs. I know that Mr. Brett, in terms of our putting our school board meetings up on the web and in the internet, there are increased legal demands in that area. Fortunately, there are also solutions out there, but they're not free. That really seems to be the area where, given the changing environment and, whether it's people trying to hack you or, a court telling you, thou must do this, that we have to respond to and where the need is increased.
But wouldn't that be part of the technology budget?
Again, think students. do you have one student? Do you have 100? And what would change? Do you have to buy a license for the student? Do you have to buy? Again, the thought here was really to break it down into a meaningful per student amount, and maybe the issues you're addressing. I mean, while legitimate, maybe need to be part of a different sort of a conversation.
Yeah, maybe it's part of another budget session, just so that we end up getting the full understanding of everything. But for this, since it's really instructional in students, yeah, I think what you've done here is good.
Other questions? Mr. Castillo?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess a question here. I'm already well aware that the demands on our budget are going to be many. How do we know what's the right amount for instructional materials?
Well, thank you for asking that question, because I struggled with that, for quite a while. And the conclusion I came to, good, bad, or indifference, is the fact that if each location doesn't lose any more money and in fact gets additional funds for next year, we're still better off than we would have been otherwise had we not gone through this exercise and taken some sort of an action on it. I am not sure where that right amount is, but I do know that back in FY15 and FY16, that's really where the grumbling about materials and supplies began to come up through the buildings, and people, the staff, teachers, began to notice that that they had fewer resources with which to work. So is it quasi-arbitrary? Yes. Is there some kind of rationale behind it? Yes. If the board were to weigh everything and say, well, we could only commit $40,000 or $50,000 to this, could we distribute it, quote unquote, fairly equitably? Yes. We could do that.
Bill?
So I have a question about Thackeray. It looks like there is no funding for ESOL or for regular education there. I asked that because I do have a child there who's regular education. I know his class has the significant number of ESOL students in it and did last year as well. So I was just wondering, are we providing resources to all of our students there?
And I'm going to give you the finance answer, which is not necessarily the education answer, but I can kind of put the two together. And that is, Jesse Thackeray Preschool was established primarily as a special ed preschool to provide services to those specific students. As part of that, and actually it's part of the program, one of the resources to bring in, and I don't know what we'll call them now, peer partners, typical peers, the word seems to change, but essentially tuition paying, students who are not necessarily, have special needs, but can benefit from that program and can also help the students there in the program, as well as students with limited English proficiency. But at the core of it, I feel like I'm going to have sort of the IB conversation again. That it is primarily its focus and its raison d'etre is for special ed. The other students are there. They're providing support both by their presence there and by their parents paying tuition. But so when we report Thackeray Preschool, it gets reported as special ed because they're special ed teachers there.
So there isn't necessarily like ESOL specific
line item
or. I think that's important for people to know who are sending their children there. I don't know that that's or we support it fully as a full preschool, so that if you're coming in there and not speaking English, and I know there are kids in my son's class who don't speak English, and their parents don't speak English, and I've seen them not get a lot of support, and it's not the teacher's fault. I'm not faulting anyone for it. I'm just, calling on us to, if we want to have an inclusive preschool, we need to make sure we provide the resources for every student who's there. And if you want it to be an inclusive preschool, you can't not provide services then for the regular education, and the ESOL students only provide them for special ed kids, and then the kids who are there regular education don't get what they need. They're just there to support someone else learning, which does a disservice to the other children there. Again, this isn't pointing a finger at anybody.
No,
It's just
understood.
to think about it going forward, how we want to support the preschool program.
I will pass that along to Ms. Germer.
Yeah, thank you.
know,
I
yeah,
I've talked to her about it.
And actually, if you want to shoot her an email as well, that would be
yeah.
great.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Sorry.
Yep, go, Mr.
Sorry, one
Lawrence.
more. So Hunter, I've been looking at page 4 that has TJ and MEH.
Okay.
Now the 2018 projected is what? Straight line?
It depends on which you want to look at. There's spending per student and inflation-adjusted spending per student. The right one above each other at each building.
Well, I was looking
Yeah.
at material, the top line, material
Okay.
supply spending.
Okay.
If in 2014 they should have gotten 5th grade and they didn't, I'm trying to figure out, I mean, they obviously didn't get it in 14, 15, 16, 17, and we're projecting the same amount in 18 as we are in 17, so that wouldn't imply that they're getting any additional money to make up for 5th grade, which is what I'm trying to figure out.
Correct. And again, the projected was simply to say, taking this budget, as our base budget, and if we just take it and move it forward and say the same amounts that we have budgeted this year for materials and supplies, we will assume that those locations have those same amounts to work with next year. That's what the projected column means. It means no change.
Right, which
Okay.
makes sense
Okay.
if they were getting the right grade configuration to begin with. But it seems like this one, what we're saying is we know they didn't get what they should have.
Right.
And we're still projecting doing that going forward for 2 schools, which just seems odd.
Well, there's
We're not going to do that going forward.
Well, here's the deal. It's a budgetary decision. It's a policy decision, as Dr. Schiller would say, and he's correct. And that's why there are 2 columns here. There's your projected if you do nothing, and then there is a potential adjustment column next to it to say if you were to, fill in the blank. And in this case, the blank is bring the levels of supplies per student to their FY15, FY16 levels. Then you come to your adjusted amount.
Right,
Yeah.
but I mean, for these 2 schools, the first adjustment should be changing the 2018 projected for MEH, subtracting out 5th grade and putting that into TJ, because how could we not
in reality
do that?
What happened is
You're going to start talking about reality.
Well,
we're in
yes.
real trouble.
Think about the grade reconfigurations. The building, Mary Ellen still kept 3 grade levels. Instead of 5, 6, 7, it was 6, 7, 8.
Mm-hmm.
The building that lost a grade level was the high school.
Right.
So in terms of looking at, well, where should the money be coming from, or where should the money have been moved from, it was not MEH. It really should have been the high school, ultimately, with the net effect of they lost a grade, TJ picked up a grade.
Okay, then it still comes down to why is the 2017 actual and the 2018 projected the same for George Mason as well? I mean,
Yeah.
It seems like you've identified a mistake
Okay.
that has to be fixed.
Yes.
And we should say the baseline is
Yeah.
giving TJ what it's owed, and then if we do any other adjustments, that's on top of that, but we can't
Correct.
say we're just going to keep giving them what they were getting because they got
Well,
the shorts.
and I can say this, looking you all in the eye with a straight face, is that our schools do not waste money. They do not. I mean, every purchase comes across my desk, and honestly, if I see something that I do not think is appropriate or think could be funded another way, I will either email or call the principal, and we'll have a conversation. So I in my heart of hearts, and I did think about this, John, because part of the logic here is to say, well, should money from GM then be transferred over to the high school? Well, the fact of the matter is, they needed it, and they spent it. And then if you also look at the adjustments and the adjusted amounts, as a result, George Mason is going up on a per student basis in terms of nominal dollars, $15 per student, whereas MEH is going up $27 per student. Thomas Jefferson would be going up $75 per student. So really, that lower amount of the increase, I mean, George Mason felt the impacts too in terms of inflation, student enrollments, and cuts and everything else. But therefore, in terms of restoration, on a per student basis, they get a much smaller number per student.
Well, but only if we do the adjustment that you suggested.
Sure.
My point is, even if we do no adjustment,
right,
George Mason has to lose the grade equivalent and TJ has to get it. And I just don't see that anywhere here, which is what confuses me. But the other question is, so George Mason, they had their budget. I assume they spent their budget. Is there anything that we've got going forward that they now have started to fund that we're going to have to fund that we wouldn't have because they wouldn't have had the money to spend?
The one thing that leaps to mind is their Makerspace STEAM program, which is heavy in consumables.
Right.
To your point, Mr. Lawrence, when I asked Hunter to go through this, I had made a decision not to take away money from a school at this point. That would be the board's determination. It would be not our determination to displace money from, in this case, George Mason and put it to another school. So I'll take responsibility for that.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's not about it's just understanding how, we had things messed up, they need to be fixed, but all the numbers stay the same. That's what I couldn't get. So now I understand that it's not
well,
in there.
and because it is, as you go over time, obviously the things such as budget cuts, student numbers, and inflation still continue to take a toll in different ways over different years.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, we will move on to the FY18 roll-up budget and go-forward schedule.
No, for preschool and non-resident tuition information.
Oh, yes. Go ahead, Dr. Schiller.
As a segue from Ms. Gill point, we've moved now to the issue of our preschool and our non-resident tuition information with regard to what we are currently charging. We looked up and researched the regional rates. We are being asked by those who want to send their children to Thackeray next year if we could set our tuition rate so they can plan accordingly. So we bring to you the information for your consideration.
Okay, great. Again, pulled regional information, and Ms. Germer has attached a lot of that in terms of preschool. Currently charging $5,000 a year to attend Jesse Thackeray. Ms. Germer's looking at the number is suggesting increasing that to either $6,500 or $7,000 a year, given the fact that we don't have a daycare component with that program, and it's a somewhat shorter day than other programs. We're keeping an eye on the number of slots available as well. Currently, we have 31 preschoolers paying tuition, but given the Child Find activities and identifying students in our community, we may have fewer slots next year, but just simply don't know that at this time. In terms of our non-resident tuition at the other schools, went back to the code and did some research in terms of what's allowable under Virginia law, and we basically cannot charge more than the actual per capita cost per student. In terms of our three lower schools, Mount Daniel, TJ, and Maryland Henderson, we're pretty much on the mark right now at around $16,400. However, right now we're charging I think 18,000 at the high school, and given the per capita per student cost there, we could go as high as $21,300. And in addition to that, per the code, we do assess an additional charge for if there are gifted services provided.
So, are you recommending the increase, or are you suggesting that we have the option?
You have the option, sir. This is it's in your court.
Other questions? Mr. Lawrence?
Do we have the tuition dedicated for a specific use?
We do not. It is basic. It is in the revenue under line item called tuition, non-resident tuition, and it supports the operating budget.
But like Thackeray tuition doesn't support Thackeray?
No, I was thinking, I thought when we did this, we had it going toward either national board certification or other specific teacher.
It is a general revenue, yeah.
Not earmarked.
Yeah, I thought we had
And it does, in as much.
I mean, that it's part of the general operating budget.
Exactly.
I don't know of it being as earmarked specifically.
For me, I'll be honest. For me, earmarked means, we're getting these specific funds for career and tech ed to buy equipment, and I can look at that revenue item and I can go into that budget and I can tell you exactly where that item is budgeted. And therefore, if you don't get the revenue, you don't spend the money.
And John,
very pedantic in that way.
John, I think I remember the conversation about maybe offsetting that, but I wasn't sure how it was ultimately used. I remember the conversation about it would help with the teacher program, and I'm not sure is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, because we had to cut some things, and then we had a tuition. I'll check with Susan Carney. She may remember. We had a tuition that we wanted to go toward a specific thing for teachers.
But I'm not sure we earmarked it. I think we had the conversation about it would any increases in tuition would help that, would offset it. But I don't know that we specifically earmarked it for that. That's all I'm saying. But I remember that conversation.
I do remember the conversation as well. And as I recall, I can go back and check my notes. I think at the time we had identified up to as many as like 20 to 24 potential slots at the high school that we would be able to take tuition students for. In reality, right now we only have 11. I think last year we maybe had 14. So we had budgeted for the optimistically and aggressively and hoping that we would get 20 tuition students, but we ended up getting fewer than that.
Okay.
Castillo.
That was my recommendation as well, as the tuition was going to be deployed for PD activities. I don't know if there's a need to earmark this if we choose to do that in the future. I think the other question I would have is, we've heard a lot about how badly people want to come here, and there are certain private schools where parents think of us as an option if they go K-8. Could we be doing more outreach to fill up those empty slots for as long as they're empty, as long as they're available at Mason? What are we doing now?
And I believe Dr. Jones was working with the guidance office and the principal at George Mason on that. I'm not completely aware.
Into that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Ms. Gill?
I'll be the advocate for the preschool here. If we're going to raise tuition for the preschool, I think that money should go to the preschool. That preschool needs resources desperately. They need people. They don't have, the only books they have are books that parents have, old books that parents have donated. They had no puzzles last year. They had no toys last year. It all came from parents like me and other putting out the word saying, like, please drop off supplies to the school. I mean, they had nothing. So we opened up a school with some, really bare bones school, and they need more teacher support. The teachers are doing so much extra work. They've got kids there with really severe special needs. They have no clinic person there. So you've got teachers, you've got Rachel trying to administer medication. They've got kids in, wheelchairs who cannot get out to go to the bathroom. So the teacher, anytime they need help, the teacher's got to help them get to the bathroom. They can't feed themselves. I really think that if we want to, wasn't realizing that the tuition that I pay doesn't go to the school to support the school, and I would have assumed that it did at the preschool. So I think that if we're increasing the tuition for the preschool, that money should go to the preschool in some way to support them, because it's almost irresponsible what we're asking those teachers to do there, given the level of needs that the students they have to serve have. And I see it because I'm there. I don't know that other people are as much. I'm in the classroom there, see it as much.
And I would say, I understand exactly where you're coming from. One cautionary note on that is with earmarked funds, again, our practice is when funds are specifically designated for a purpose, we don't allow spending of those funds until the funds have been collected. So it may mean that, in that case, if it were going for supplies or something like that, that the preschool would be limited in how much they could purchase in the first quarter, the second quarter, the third quarter, because we would treat them as designated funds as we do in other areas, where it's basically here's your revenue and here's your spending, and you can see the relationship. But I understand exactly what you're saying, and in fact, the tuition, in fact, the tuition that is collected for preschool does go to pay, does go into the teachers' salaries and what materials and supplies they do have. It's just that in terms of the budget itself, can you draw a direct line to say, okay, this money went in here and it got spent exactly here, and at this point, no.
Mr. Reinger.
So I have at least one comment to start and then a few questions. The comment to start is, I think I would tend to avoid earmarks because in my experience, they don't do anything. They can sometimes have a little bit of effect in the first year, but people find the way to shuffle money somewhere else. And if you're going to spend more than the earmark, then it really has no long-term effect. What we ought to do is say, if we're going to increase tuition at Jesse Thackeray, we're going to increase tuition, and we want to provide additional support. And there are clearly some things that need to happen. Like, as I've mentioned a couple of times, the notion that we don't have any custodial help at Jesse Thackeray, I think, is a significant problem that simply has to be addressed. But I think those are independent. We ought to charge what the right amount to charge is, and then support the preschool the way we should. Mm-hmm. I've got a couple of questions on the George Mason piece. The first one is perhaps this is a stray neuron in my head, but this says that the statute says that you can't include capital cost in the charges. Don't we pay capital costs for the kids we send to TJ High School?
We do send capital costs to the students that we sent at TJ High School, and I actually tried to pull this one on them when they slipped that contract by. There is additional language in here that says except where two school divisions enter into a mutually agreed upon contract that capital costs can be included. So it's actually in the same section. I just thought I didn't realize that I would have included the entire section. It wasn't actually that much longer, but that was added to the code, and we do have an agreement that says, yes, we agree to pay.
So that
part of the
benefits
building.
governor schools, but not people who don't have that kind of same relationship with other school systems.
Correct. Thank you.
Well, and the amount that TJ had initially proposed to charge us with the new capital cost was significantly higher than what we're now paying now. I mean, they wanted a ridiculous figure.
Well, they wanted the money up front as opposed to amortize it over time.
They wanted everybody else to pay for the school and then do tuition as well. So, yeah, that was fun.
The second thing is it says, and the actual additional costs, any special education or gifted and talented program provided the pupil. So additional costs, we talked before about the IB program and things like IB exam fees being over $100,000. Are those additional charges that are included as actual costs? Because
We actually, above and beyond, we're currently charging $500 for each tuition student who accesses the IB program. Above and beyond the tuition. So there's your base tuition, and then if you're accessing the IB program, you also have to pay $125 a quarter.
And is that reflective of the additional costs from things like IB exams and program management?
It is.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would have guessed it would be higher than that.
Exams are what, like 100 and something each? Yeah. That's like 4 or 5 exams.
Jeannie.
Okay.
Quick. How many kids are taking the IB?
That's all the questions.
Good questions.
Program kids and kids that
Any other
just
questions?
take an IB class, but take
Just-
other classes. They take an IB
Thank you,
class,
Mr.
so
Chairman.
it's
Just a question, if our per capita costs are 21.3 for the high school, why are we charging 18?
Because we haven't revisited this in a while. To be perfectly honest, since the recession, we were really bumping up against our maximum. This suggests that it is time to revisit those and change them. And frankly, it just.
Yeah, and I would say that while I agree with Mr. Reidinger's sentiment about earmarks, I do think professional development is a little different because it's kind of a bursty concept where if there's incremental money available, there's incremental PD. It's not a protracted programmatic issue. And then I think the other thing is that we should fund each school to meet its needs. I don't think we should view tuition as a particular funding stream for a particular school. And I think, we need to stay focused on the fact, again, as I said earlier, that we have multiple demands on our budget, and that's not going to change. And so I think we do need to stay focused on that big picture.
And I have, yes, sir.
Sorry, one
Ms.
more.
Lawrence?
Hunter, in reading the code language, it seems like we should only have one per capita cost. Because, it talks for elementary or secondary of such school division. So how can we have, I understand how we can break it out, but how can we say, one is for elementary and middle and one is for the high school? And does 18,000 come out to what our per capita cost is according to the code?
Again, according to the code, at this point, our per capita cost is $21,300 for the high school.
But that's for the high school, but the code says of such school division, not of any school in the division. So
again, the code says for elementary or secondary pupils, as the case may be. Therefore, I took the K through 8, calculated that, and then the 9 through 12 and calculated a separate number for that, because the code calls out specifically elementary or secondary. It does differentiate.
Okay, and their secondary is the way we have our grades in the high school?
Configured.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. So I would ask a question of where are we at with potential? We're going to move forward with the review of the FY18 roll-up.
Yes.
Budget and go forward.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, 5 days after
Hold on. I'm sorry, could I ask one question?
Yes.
I know we started by Dr. Schiller saying that at least the Jesse Thackeray parents were asking questions about what the amount was going to be next year. Do we need to have a discussion and a resolution at least on that, and maybe on the tuition for tuition students next year tonight, or what are the timelines for that, and is that something we need to discuss right now?
In talking with Ms. Germer, thank you for raising this point. We are at the point where we need to, especially with Jessie Thackeray, get the information out to families. And she was hoping we could get a decision tonight, at least on the Thackeray tuition. I don't think it's so pressing on the other tuition piece.
Well, let's have a discussion about that. What are folks thinking about the potential increase? What Mr. Kimball has put out there of what other folks offering this type of service are charging. We are a little below that. And so Ms. Gill has some concerns of how to distribute the money, but let's just have the general discussion about what we are looking to potentially charge for tuition for the coming year, so that we have any comments about.
Could I just ask a question with respect to the tuition? It says here that per capita costs are $16,400 for elementary and middle schools. Is that Thackeray as well? Is Thackeray $16,400 or what is?
It is not. I did not. I pulled all the Thackeray numbers out of those calculations and treated preschool as a different animal.
Do you have any ballpark? Is it more than 5,000?
It is more than 5,000.
More than 10? More than 7,500?
I think it's probably slightly more than 10.
I'd wager, though, that the costs are differentially allocated towards the special education students there.
Yes.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
Thackeray.
Yes.
And again, in looking at this, staff simply looked at comparable programs in the area, what they charged, given the fact that there is no before or after care, and it is a shorter day. And so I worked with Ms. Germer on that, and so I trust her judgment in the recommendations.
I don't think the tuition is necessarily out of line. I do think that we have to be careful that we are providing the right education to the kids who are there, because I've got personal experience there, and I'm not going to go into it, but I'm not going to spend $7,000 next year to send my child there. Okay, and I wouldn't spend $5,000 either. So I think you have to figure out, are we going to provide what kind of education? If you're going to raise my tuition $2,000 next year, I want to make sure that if my child is there as a typical peer, they're getting the education they need, the value, and they're getting the same education they would get, and they're going to be prepared for kindergarten in the same way they would be if they were at a different school. Because then there are other costs associated with sending your child there, because you have to get extra support to make sure they're prepared to go to kindergarten. So if we're not going to provide that kind of support for the typical peer students there, I don't think that we can charge parents more money to have their kids there just to support. And I love the philosophy of an inclusive preschool. I really do. And I love all the intangibles my son gets there. But I think it's also important to make sure that kids are learning their numbers and their letters and their shapes when they're in the 3 and 4-year-old classes. And if I'm paying $7,000 and not getting that, I'm not going to be a very happy parent.
Other comments about this?
I don't disagree with what Ms. Gill is saying.
And I'm sorry, I apologize. It's hard for me to separate my personal experience from this, but I think it's valuable to somebody. I'm not going to, I'm not speaking in a. I've got a typical peer student there, and he's been there for 2 years. So I have a very good experience at that preschool. And I think the teachers and staff there are wonderful, and they do everything they possibly can. So this is not a knock on them at all.
My experiences were with other local preschools, a couple of them. I'm not so sure that in all preschools, in every case, the ball's getting hit out of the park. But what I'd say is, I think we clearly need to have more resources at Jessie Thackeray. I think the actual tuition seems low for the market. And so I think regardless of whether we raise the tuition, we ought to make sure that we're spending enough at Jessie Thackeray so both the special education and the typical peers get the education that they want and deserve. And I think to help finance that, it's appropriate to charge an amount equivalent with what is being charged otherwise. So, 6,500 or 7,000 seems reasonable to me. I think we ought to make sure we've got a good program at Jesse Thackeray. And I think there are some challenges that probably go with typical peers that they might not face at a at a preschool that didn't have such a large percentage of special needs kids. But there are also significant advantages because you have certified teachers, which is often not the case in preschool. So it's a mixture of things, and I think being in that environment can help kids in a lot of other ways too. So my inclination, as I said, would be to raise the tuition, to help and to use that money without using the term earmark, but make sure that we are
adequately funding material supplies and
adequately
support
funding the
yeah,
preschool,
school,
of which
yeah.
materials and school supplies is a part.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's important for every student there, no matter their needs.
Well, I guess we come back to a threshold question with respect to the staffing and other budgetary inputs that you initially made, Dr. Schiller, with respect to, on a building-by-building basis, are you comfortable about the existing resourcing requests for Jesse Thackeray? Is there anything we don't know about that we should?
I'd like to defer that till next week. Give me a chance to go back and look at it very seriously. Okay, and deeply. I'll be over there with the faculty myself on Thursday as it is. It'll give me an opportunity. I'm meeting with the faculty. Give me an opportunity to get some more firsthand information. So if I might indulge a few more days to look at that. But I think the point that I hear around this table, which I would just underscore, is that all of our students, all of our schools, no matter the grade, no matter tuition or non-tuition, we need to assure that all of the students and all the schools, all the facilities are adequately staffed and adequately supplied so that the top flight services will extend as a hallmark of our district. I don't think any board member disagrees with that. It's just a matter that you're going to be now, after we do our wrap up tonight, facing heavy policy decisions of allocations of limited resources. And that's what it's going to come down to. We'll make our recommendations when you ask us to make our recommendations. But the key is going to be that how are you going to now take the limited resources with all the myriad of data we've developed for you and that we all know are all needs? Or how do we go forward to access and try to find additional resources to satisfy the needs of the salary, the needs of the staffing, the needs of the mandate, the needs of the schools, the materials. These are hard decisions that this board is facing.
If I may, Mr. Chair, just as a follow-up, I agree with Mr. Reidinger's sentiment about the tuition of 6,500 or 7. Mm-hmm. I would also say we should not waste any time in doing the same with respect to George Mason. If we know that we're not charging what the cost is, well, let's fix that now. And I would also agree that we do need to look at the needs of every student, and we as a board need to approach the needs of every student as board members and dispassionately so that we realize we are thinking about a division of 2,700 children.
I'm trying to turn over every rock and ask every question that I could possibly ask because this gives you a fresh look at the budget. And staff has been remarkable in responding. Now, we may not have all the details in the right format that you want, but I think you can understand that we want to make sure, as you've said throughout, this is a transparent process and that you have everything laid out before you so that we can then wrestle through hard decisions. And so where we've fallen short, we'll want to know how we can better provide with you. But I think we're trying to ask the harder questions and some of the things, instead of assuming that we'll always do what we've always done, I'm asking why are we doing what we're doing, when we're doing it, and how we're doing it. And that's why we're putting this out for you.
Mr. Nkrumah?
I just want to inject a little bit of market dynamics into this George Mason and JTP thing. It's one thing, asking for, or should I say bluntly, jacking up the fees. But what does that do to to demand? I mean, does that, taking it from 18 to 21, does that deter certain parents from saying, look, they're just about good schools in surrounding jurisdictions, and therefore I'll just send the kid to a public school in Arlington rather than, I could do 18, but 21, 22, now I'm in college tuition territory, do I want to do this? Versus, sort of looking at, you anticipating what, maybe a few more and you got less this year. Is that what's going to happen when we send it up to 22? I just want us to think about that. And I don't know if there's a way to determine that. And, to Ms. Gill's point, 5,000 is one thing. 7,000, I want some value. And for me, my motto is price is only relevant in the absence of value. If we're not getting value, then what are we paying for? If you think a Mercedes does something for you, you buy it. On the other hand, you could go buy yourself a Toyota and say it does the same thing because that's the value you apportion to it. So let's understand what we're doing here when we set these prices. I'm just throwing it out. Okay.
And I'll say to Mr. Castillo's point, I am being my children are not going to be there next year. I'm not paying this tuition next year. So I'm thinking about the other kids who will be there. I'm thinking about all the students. It's not my kids. My kids aren't going to be there. So I am thinking about what this preschool is going to be going forward and how we're going to serve every student there, and they're going to go forward in our division.
If I might respond briefly, sir, to Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Nkuma, I think the market question is an exceedingly good one. I just don't think we can answer it really. We've asked that question before, and I would think I was told the last time I asked it that there was always a waiting list for people to get into Jesse Thackeray, and that we've. It sounds, at least from the anecdotal evidence we've got, like there is. We're not driving people away with cost at George Mason right now. Instead, we're limited by what the statute allows. I don't know a way to find out more, and I think at this point, given the need to go back to what Mr. Castillo said, to make a decision, I think I'd prefer to pull the trigger and get this put behind us and move forward. And then in the future, if we turn out to have a problem, we can always adjust back. But I'd rather. My bias towards decision making wants me to say, let's just make a decision.
That's fair.
As unsatisfying as that is.
No, that's fair. That's very fair. And I don't know the answers either, but I'm just saying we should think about it while we're in our deliberations.
And two pieces of information. I thank you for reminding us about the waiting list at JTP. I do know in the past when we increased tuition at George Mason, because it used to be quite a bit lower than this. There was one family in particular, and I think that they had two students going there, and they threw up their hands and said, you know what, no, I can't afford this, and whatever. I will also say that there's a fair number, and continues to be a fair number of students whose tuition is being paid by the World Bank or an embassy, and where it's not the parents who are, ultimately having to foot the bill. I just simply have to fill out the paperwork and certify that, in fact, yes, we received this amount of tuition. So that doesn't help at all. But
No, I'm just.
As an experiment in demand elasticity, I guess one of the things I would look at is, so where else are you going to go? And private schools, price tags still make 21.8 or whatever it is, a screaming deal. And so I think it'll be interesting to find out. I don't think we're gouging at that price. We're covering our costs, maybe. And so I think, well, to the extent statutorily allowed, but I think we should charge as much as we think is feasible, and I think this is reasonable. So,
Mr. Lawrence.
Just a couple things. First, if we're concerned about people who are there now suddenly having their fees go up, we can also grandfather whoever has a kid at GM and
Fantastic
say,
idea.
You pay this until your kid leaves, and then anybody new coming in pays a different amount. I mean, that's not very unusual at all, and it would be fair because let's face it, you don't put your kid into high school thinking they're only going to stay there for 2 years unless you're moving somewhere, fairly far away. I've got no problem increasing tuition at Thackeray, but what we can't do is say we're going to do it knowing that we're going to fill all the needs that they brought to us, because all the needs that the schools brought to us equaled what, 2.5 million?
And that's the staff component,
Right. And
Not 2.5 million at Thackeray, right?
No,
No, overall.
Right.
I mean, we have to look at the whole school division. So what we can't do is say, we're going to fill what Thackeray brought to us now, and then everybody else is going to get cut, because we can't afford 2.5 million. And then that's on top of, another 900,000 for all the stuff that we have to do. So what the teachers, what the buildings brought us, we can't afford. So what we can't do is be unfair to everybody else by saying, well, we're going to raise tuition at Thackeray, but we're going to guarantee we're going to fill the requests that you brought, but we're not going to say that for others. So if we're going to raise it, okay, let's raise it, but let's not prejudge how we're going to divide up the cuts, because there are going to be cuts and they're going to be big. We can't say Jesse Thackeray is going to be held harmless. We can do our best. We can try to cut as little as possible, but I don't think it's fair to the rest of the schools to say, here we are at budget session 2, congratulations Thackeray, you just won the lottery, and you're fully funded, and everybody else, you've got to start fighting for what's left.
Can I stop the grandfathering? If you're gonna, there are kids there who are 2 and 3 whose parents, they also need to know right away if their tuition's going up by $2,000, because that may make a decision for them on whether they're going to keep their kid there next year. They need to be able to apply now for preschool for next year. I know the day school's application is due Friday.
May I throw out one other option, which, since we're...
The grandfather them in too, or you let them know tomorrow that their tuition's going up.
And, this is from an administrative standpoint of trying to have people paying tuition in various categories or whatever. There's another possible strategy would be to maybe not ratchet it up the whole amount, but phase it in over 2 or 3 years, which might have a similar effect to grandfathering, because honestly, I know at least George Mason, the tuition has not changed for 5 or 6 years. So that has remained stagnant. Just throwing it out there.
Okay. So it sounds to me like some sort of hybrid, and whether we grandfather or whether we at least we stagger it. So do we use a percentage, some sort of inflation adjustment, or a certain number for these folks? What do we do? Is this something we could decide now, or would you come back to us with some ideas?
I would hope you would decide this evening.
I guess we have to answer this evening. Mr. Castillo?
If I may, I think we should remind ourselves our obligation is to provide a high-quality, free education to the K-12 population in the city of Falls Church. To the extent we're educating people who are outside of that, I think that's great, but I think we need to keep our eyes on the ball as to what our core mission is. And if we are not charging and not recovering the full costs, then we are doing a disservice to the people whose interests we are bound to protect. So I don't willy-nilly want to impose cost increases on people, but in the scheme of things, I think that is preferable to some of the alternatives that are coming out here.
Well, but the cost increases aren't just for non-residents when it comes to Thackeray, though.
Well, but to the extent that there is, we don't have an obligation to provide free preschool to everybody, to all
non-special needs
comers.
kids, right.
And so, again, if we can do incremental things over and above our core mission, that's great. But I think we need to remain focused on what it is that we're charged with doing first and foremost, and then deal with other things later.
Yeah, towards that end is. Did you have something to say, Mr. Did you?
Just clarification, unless Virginia is different, you do have an obligation to provide a free and appropriate education for special need children
Yes,
at preschool.
no, absolutely.
Right.
No,
Yeah,
no,
I
no.
mean, I don't want someone out there to believe that we are, well,
Oh, no.
No, he was talking about tuition for
And
general
yes,
ed.
and the
Yes,
other,
but-
not
yeah.
special ed.
yes, okay.
The other piece I would add, and I would like to think I'm channeling Liz Germer here, and if I'm not, please forgive me, but my understanding from Liz and also from Kathy Aleko when this program was over at Mount Daniel is in reality, the typical peers bring value to the program themselves simply by being there.
Yes.
So it's not that they're like draining on the program, they're actually enriching the educational experience for the students for whom we are required to provide services. So just wanted to throw that
Yeah, and I think that's why the program was set up that way, because it is important for those typical peers. That's the special needs students get to witness the behavior of them, and it's almost like they're their little tutors. But towards as far as tuition goes, I mean, can we have two phases, like new people coming in have the increased tuition? I'm not necessarily talking about the preschool at this point. And then for those who are currently maybe have a slight increase every year, just like cost of living increase, cost increase, whatever.
Ultimately, we can do whatever you
Yeah, but I
want
mean,
us to do.
just in order to be fair, I think personally we should increase our tuition to be commensurate with what we are paying now for our students, and we should also increase. But the current students. I'm sorry, it's after 9. I'm getting tired. Increase them, but not at that same
The
level.
full amount, yes. Do a phase in.
Just like any other thing that increases every year, any other kind of tuition. And then I don't know what to say about Thackeray. That's an enigma to me right now. I can't. Thank you.
Based on the numbers, you've got 31 preschool students paying $5,000, 11 at the high school paying $18,000. That's $353,000 a year. I would not want to give them a disincentive not to come back. I would rather keep this money. Maybe the new ones, I would vote. Let me put it this way: I'd vote for new kids, charge them more. These ones we hold, or we slow down some increase. I'm happy to grandfather these so we can at least keep this, and then add the new ones. That would be my vote. So
Grandfather with
grandfather them with
the slight increase to cover
it wouldn't hurt. I'd support just grandfathering them and say to hell, next year or something.
Raise it
But
each year, just like every preschool raises their tuition every year. So, and I don't know, private schools as well, raise the tuition each year.
So, I'm not sure if this disagrees with you or not, Ms. Ward. I agree with Mr. Castillo about the high school. If kids are coming here and they're not Falls Church City residents, then we ought to charge what is appropriate, and I think we ought to go to the full amount that the statute allows for the high school immediately for all students. Let me finish.
Okay. No.
For Jesse Thackeray, those are, I mean, the typical peers are Falls Church kids. As you said, there's a difficult balance there. I could see either grandfathering, current people paying, or I could see ratcheting up slowly and saying, instead of going to 7,000, let's go to 6,000 and see what happens. My mind is by no means made up. I'm very much drawn to Hunter's concern about trying to grandfather some and not all, because I know from similar circumstances in non-education businesses, that's a nightmare to manage for a small school system. So my gut would be to ratchet up the preschool amount, but maybe not to the full 7,000, and take the high school to the amount that we're allowed, because it doesn't even cover our costs. It's not like we're gouging anybody. It's what our costs are minus all the things we're going to have to do for capital. So I think it's utterly fair to charge tuition students the amount that we're legally allowed to charge, which is actually less than our cost. And so that would be my preference.
Any other questions or comments? And for me on this, I agree with both Mr. Castillo and Mr. Ranger. At the high school, I do think making it the move up to the full cost, because it does not match what we ultimately pay for those students who are attending our schools. And unlike Thomas Jefferson, that can charge capital costs because to accommodate that, we are not able to do that. So I do think charging at least the statute allowable for the high school is, I think, the proper and right thing to do. With regards to Thackeray, I tend to lean more towards more of a phased process for the parents who are here. I think an increase, but I think phased. With any new student coming in, there should be that full, the $7,000. I think, as Mr. Lawrence said, I think going into that, we have to recognize the fact that we have several buildings and they all have needs, and we need to be balanced about how we approach this, because we have very limited resources that we currently have and will be receiving. So I think we do need to look at it at an across the division approach to how we are dispersing those funds. But I think with a phased approach, with some level of increase for current parents and letting them know that in advance that we will be doing that. But any new parent that would be coming in, that we do go to the full, I believe it was 7,000 would be market.
And the parents are expecting an increase. We just don't know. We haven't told them what it is, and they actually were aware of this at the end of last year as well. So
May I ask a clarifying
not going to come as a
question?
horrible shock.
Certainly.
How long do students go to Jesse Thackeray as a general matter? How many years?
2.
Generally, 2.
So when we talk about phasing, we're talking about what? We're talking there'll be complete turnover in 2 years.
1 year.
I'm just saying,
Does
but
that change how we approach the issue?
Yeah, I mean, phasing for a 2-year school doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, you grandfather who's there so that the next year they would pay the same thing, and then they'd be gone, and everybody.
And for the next 2 years.
Otherwise, you're just making Hunter's life miserable. Which is fine, but
Hey.
So we have two groups. We have people who are coming for the first time, and we have people who are coming for the second year.
Correct.
Yeah, because only tuition-paying students only go, there are no 2-year-old tuition-paying students. Only special needs students can be 2-year-old there. So it's only 3 and 4-year-olds, and the 4-year-olds are going to Mount Daniel.
But even I think if
So it's only the
for
3-year-old
those parents of students who are coming back for next year being there last year, I think if they were anywhere else, they would be getting some type of increase in their cost. So I think we definitely still should do that, but we don't have to take it to the full $7,000. But I think they should, if they were anywhere else, they would be paying additional cost. Where the parents that we put out there now that are coming for the full 2 years, that we're putting the full $7,000, if that's what we decide to do, the full $7,000 cost of that. But again, we need to recognize of hearing some of the comments tonight that we do our best, knowing that we have limited resources, to give those students, the peer students, a little bit better experience while they're attending Thackeray as well.
What can we do, 6,000 this year and then 7,000 next year? So everybody this year pays 6,000, including the people who are there. But those kids they only do that for 1 year, and they're out to Mount Daniel. And so the kids who are coming, and then the year after that it goes up to 7,000. So like you're kind of aware, like tuition, we're phasing this in this year. Tuition's going to go up to 6,000, and then the 2020 school year it will be $7,000. And that helps you make the decision too, if you're coming in with a 3-year-old. I'm going to pay $6,000 this year. I know next year it's going to be $7,000, and then we're going to be on a regular increase schedule for inflation that you'd be on anyway. You know, $200 or $300.
I think that's the big thing, that we need to be on a schedule, opposed to going years without adjusting. And I don't know with regard to George Mason, if we can, with this being that it's a statute that limits us, if we can, once we hit the cap nail, the 21 change, if we can at some point ever revisit that to make the effort to cover some of the costs that we take on when those students come on board. But it sounds like it's a state statute that limits us on that at this point, that we're well under.
Right, yeah.
Good, Dr. Schiller?
Yeah, I might add, those children who may be coming to our school next year, if they're looking at another school nearby, they're going to be looking at more money elsewhere to code for the year or two than if they come to us. So, as Ms. Germer and I discussed, if you take a look at the first regional comparison here, that would be roughly $6,800. A parent would make that determination. Do I go to that particular preschool or go to Thackeray? So someone coming in new, we're still a value. Still a value. And so I would think that you might want to be comparable to the marketplace at the very least for those coming in. What you want to do for someone who has been there for a year and is going to be there another for those numbers of children, that's where you could either grandfather or do a half step up.
Mr. Reiniger?
So I'm just trying to put together a way to sort of do this. Would it generally satisfy people's desires if we said, well, it would be 1 year of extra work for Hunter? It would only be 1 year. So if we said statutory maximum for high school and middle school, recognizing, or for high school and before high school, recognizing that we don't have any students in that latter category. And then for Jesse Thackeray Preschool, we go to 7,000 or 6,500, whatever the group wants, but say that for 1 year only, we'll grandfather current year students and raise them just to 6,000.
I guess the one question I would have is, do we know, it sounds as if we don't actually know what the cost of educating the students is at Thackeray yet. Because the number that we have is a market number, but we don't know what our actual costs are.
I did a real quick and dirty, knowing approximately their budget and divided by the number of students, about 10,500, based on my memory and knowing what the total Thackeray budget is divided by the 70-some students.
So I guess I would suggest that we should ascertain what our actual cost is at all schools in the division and charge that. Now, if we're out of the market on that, then we have to revisit that. In which case we have to kind of spitball it, as my sister would say.
Yeah, I think Thackeray's a bit different because it is geared toward special needs heavily. So I think it would be a skewed cost that would,
And the program as it is currently designed needs the typical peers. So that they're really like a resource.
I think this tuition cost should be revisited each year so that you can incrementally move to your actual cost per pupil.
That would be best done sooner rather than later, right? Sometime in the fall.
Right. But it would seem to me that it would be incumbent upon the board as a policy decision each year to review our,
Exactly. I agree.
and then set accordingly, and to try to set the tuition rate at an earlier date so people can then make informed decisions. So put one.
Do we have, can we get a cost per student at Thackeray, what it costs per year? We don't know yet right now, but.
I think that's what you gave, Hunter.
Do you want me to do it right now?
Envelope is around
About 10,005.
Okay, I just want to make sure, so it's approximately that much, and that includes all the special education requirements and
Exactly.
everything.
It's the Thackeray
That
budget.
The typical peers probably don't get all the services.
Probably higher because.
Well, they're in the room with the other student, but I see what you're saying in terms of like the
Services and
pullout
stuff,
and the
yeah.
physical therapy and the speech and those sorts of
Thank
things.
you.
Yes, gotcha. That's right, you do work in special ed, don't you?
So do we have any
Forgetting.
agreement on this, and that we can take up a motion to?
Actually, you can't vote.
Well, we're going to put it in
Yeah.
the
Under
business
business
item.
Yeah.
But are we at some level of agreement? So we'll just for now, we'll move on to the review of the FY18 roll-up budget.
And the go-forward plan. What I thought we'd do in a very brief fashion is to take a journey of where we started 3 days after I began and where we are today. Because in effect, we need to start moving the board into a decision-making mode. You were kind enough to provide to me the guidance. We sat here in first week of December, first meeting, asking for guidance of going forward of how you would like for the budget to be processed to develop. I'm not going to read you all of these things, but essentially we've been able to use this as our guideline for how we have brought to you the information. The only thing I've not been able to do, and that is to provide you with a program-oriented budget. I would urge that the board, if they wish to move in this direction, you need to start that well before the budget season in the fall. And oftentimes, if you want to do a cost-benefit analysis in the POB, then I would urge you to consider having an independent group do that and find independent funding so there's no in-house value or in-house bias for an evaluation of a program. We will, once the board starts making its policy decisions, we'll translate all of what we have given to you in gross fashion to a school-by-school budget. So you'll be able to have that and see your comparisons. On the second page, I've excerpt from your triennial plan and your work plan budget development, all of the things that you had said you wanted to do going forward for this year. And some of these apply for your go-forward plan with regard to outreach to the community as well as the city government. And I would just urge you to take a look at I provided hard copy for that as well. So, just as a quick roll-up and a reminder of where we are and where you need to go, I have asked basically to quickly give to you and for our viewing public's pleasure a bit of an overview one more time. So, with that in mind, I'm going to ask for Hunter to talk about starting with where we are with our cost drivers.
Okay. Again, I believe this is all information that you've seen before and has been made public before, but just wanted to kind of review the bidding here. In terms of next year cost drivers, they fall into three or four big categories. They're the fixed benefits cost, like the retirement and the health insurance, over which we have little or no control. There's staff services that need to be added to address student enrollment growth. Again, competitive salaries for staff, and also to ensure that students have adequate materials and supplies. Also, 85% of our budget is personnel. Of that, about 3/4 is salaries, and one quarter is benefits, and then the next big category is purchase services. So between those two categories, that you're talking about 95% of your budget there, and these are categories over which we really have little control. In terms of fixed cost changes, have provided a list of both the personnel and the non-personnel fixed cost items that we've been able to identify thus far, which taken together total about $690,000. In terms of looking at the salary history, have provided a little more information here.
Hunter, could you stop? You said 916?
Actually, 690.
Oh, sorry.
690. Yes. History of the salary improvements, about what has taken place. One thing I would point out is, given the board's decision on the calendar and reducing the number of days with students, and also basically making them unencumbered days for the professional staff, for the teachers, what this means is that for support staff who work with students or provide services to students, which would be food service, bus drivers, paraprofessionals, these clinic aides, that would actually mean 2 fewer days of work, 2 fewer days of pay. And I know Dr. Schiller has addressed this with a memo to the board, suggesting one option would be to counteract the negative impact here by making adjustments to the salary scales accordingly, so that nobody would lose money, and simultaneously our support salary scales would become more competitive with the region. But it would be about $36,000 reduction just for those 2 days. In terms of the various building blocks or costs of the salary improvements for staff, a step is $950,000, and each 1% is about $360,000. To the point Mr. Lawrence made at our last meeting, one approach to make sure that our teacher salary scales stays fairly in line with Arlington would be a fix that would cost about $44,000. It would be very specifically targeted at certain lanes and steps. Provided the information once again on where we stand with Arlington with the professional scales, where we stand regionally with support, hourly rates. In terms of class size enrollments and growth, have provided information in terms of FT about where we are currently, what's being asked for next year, and then the associated cost with that by employee group, professional support, administrative, and also by location. And behind that, the board had requested that we look at the personnel requests and see if we could reshuffle them into some logical categories. And Dr. Schiller had identified that, obviously we need to flag the mandated ones first. These I've worked with Liz Germer on. And so we've identified the mandated, those positions that are directly related to classroom instruction, the delivery of instruction to students. Third category is those positions which provide other direct support to services, although not necessarily to students, although not necessarily in the classroom, and then positions related to overall school operations. And I would say, for example, the request for clerical support at Jesse Thackeray Preschool, which would, although not delivering instruction, would in fact address some of the things that Ms. Gill brought up in terms of the clinic, the food, assisting teachers, some administrative things. So we've broken those out by category. Something you saw at the last meeting too, operating revenue as projected currently, we're anticipating, given the information we have received from the state, from the governor, and then also some preliminary projections from the city manager and general government staff, revenue increase of $1.5 million at this particular point. And so, what does this mean if you take it all together? On the final, actually penultimate page, have put together the price tag of the various items, just listed the fixed cost. Assuming that the board gave all staff a step increase and a 1% cost of living adjustment, again, just one scenario, provided the competitive adjustment for the teacher scale, factoring in the savings from the fact that there'd be 2 student days, the total request for new staff of the $2.5 million, and then the total of what is one option for restoring materials and supplies to 114. Total new costs of $4.65 million. Offset the revenue by $1.5 million, and if you were looking at a gap, we would currently be at about $3.15 million, assuming all those things were factored in to the budget. Obviously, you've got a lot of work to do.
Thank you, Hunter. Again, I would just point out to the board, to remind the board that everything has been driven off of your priorities and your work plan. And again, your decision points revolve around your one priority of having excellent staff and to appropriately support them with their salaries, as well as considering step increase as any other increase. The second priority is your 21st century teaching and learning, which directly relates to the teachers that we need in order to accommodate 1, enrollment, 2, program needs. Thirdly, your policy commitment of small class sizes, less than 23 to 1 in your early grades and less than 25 to 1 in your upper grades. And we provided you the staffing that's necessary, and you have some policy decisions there with regard to, as you know, where we do not have physical facilities in order to maintain your class size policy. And obviously, under your other priority of readiness for learning, why we presented the materials and the issues with revolving technology, books, food, enrichment activities. So before you, we put in here, for anyone who does not know, for the public, what the, I asked Hunter to pull out the controlling statute for the city with regard to, and here for the school board, that's the duty of the school board to file its operating budget estimates and so forth. So that is what we have presented for you. That is where we stand today. And now you have your questions before you in terms of developing your go-forward plan and some of the things that you want to see and some of the decisions that you need to make. I'll turn this over to Chairman Webb.
Are there any additional data points that anyone would need as we start again? Mr. Lawrence.
Well, maybe not data points, but just a couple questions. One is, in terms of class size versus space constraints, you don't have anything in here that says what you would do to address. So there's nothing in here that says, at this grade, you're going to be out of space, so we put in $120,000 for a trailer at TJ. There's nothing like that, right?
No, we have not done that. We have not gotten that direction from the board. We could put together those estimates of what it would need and how much more, because we have looked at it at each of the schools.
Right. Right now, you're just red flagging that.
Yes, sir.
These are your constraints, and you're going to hit your policy. And
yes, sir.
Okay. So Hunter, on the, I don't know what page it is, the page right after the pie chart.
Yes, yes.
Mine got cut off at the bottom, and I can't tell under the line that has
yes.
reduction.
Yes.
That has 690,000. Is there anything under that?
Let me check the original. And there is not.
Okay.
There is not.
All right, good answer.
Actually, it's an empty cell, and so the number is also 697,000.
Okay, because there was something
Yes,
there.
there's something
Good to
there,
know.
and it's, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence.
Oh, and the same for the school operating budget FY18 new staff requests page. The numbers at the bottom, the total classroom instruction, the FTE and the cost both got cut off on mine.
Okay. And that would be...
Looks like it's 10.775 and then maybe
974,200.
Okay.
974,200, I apologize.
All right, and then just one more on the 2017, 2018 projected operating revenue.
Yes.
The city transfer based on the city manager's preliminary estimates, the 930,000.
Yes.
Has that changed at all?
We have received no additional information one way or the other from the city manager or general government staff. I do know that they were waiting for final assessment information to come in. But as of mid-December, the range was between 2 to 2.5% of organic growth in revenues without a tax increase.
Oh, okay, so this may look new just because we've had a range before, but not a number?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That was it for me. Thank you.
And again, that's based on an assumption, the assumption being we take whatever we're given and work with it.
Right. Yeah, no, I think I just heard the percentage range, never an actual number.
Okay.
So that was
Thank you.
Any other information that any board member would like for the staff to work on as we, again, hitting the hard part of this, of figuring out what we're going to add into the budget and where we're going to potentially have to make some hard decisions of where things, we're going to have to maybe make some tough cuts or limit the dollars that we're going to put into these particular areas. So are there any other? Mr. Rattinger.
It just feels like there's still some things missing. The first thing is, I haven't caught up on all of my email, but I don't know if we've got the at least 4 of the 5 columns on the line item of, line item by line item budget, FY last year, budget and actual and budget and year-to-date spending, so we can see where there's underspending or overspending. So I'd certainly like to see that. On the
It was for this year, though.
prioritization, you broke the expenditures into buckets, but I was hoping, I don't know if it's reasonable or not, but I would very much like to see a building by building analysis of prioritization across those categories. In other words, I think, like I said, I'd be surprised if a custodian is not a priority for at least one principal and maybe more than one principal, probably more than teaching staff in some cases. There's a fair amount of discussion of, or there's a short section, I should say, of fixed costs on personnel items, but it's a little bit more difficult to go into detail. Like it says rent expense, $13,300. But I know the rent expense for the central office is more than that, right?
That would be the increase for.
That's the increase.
That's the
okay.
increase.
So all right, that's okay.
Yes.
Yeah. And it says Zscaler Cloud Security replaces Barracuda. That's a 32,000 increase because it's there's some savings from no software support on the Barracuda. That's the delta again.
Correct. Yeah. Because actually the Zscalers, what the number we're working with right now is in the lower to mid 50s, and what we did is backed off. That if we had Zscaler, we wouldn't need Barracuda, and we could direct those funds towards that program.
Okay. The other thing that I don't see anything at all about here is the question of technology, and I go ahead.
That's the agenda item for next week that we have on there.
All right, so this is just a roll-up of what we've talked about so far. If the question is this helpful? Yes. Does it cover all the things that I want to see? The answer is no, but there are things in the future for that. So I can't right now answer, is there any more data that I need, because there's more data yet to come. All right, that's it. Thank you.
But in the future, make sure we address technology and
That's
get
next
to these
Tuesday
things.
night, we'll have that.
Gotcha.
Mr. Castillo?
So in the impact analysis, it talked about the leadership step reduction. Is that, so there are some personnel issues, both with respect to that step. Is that gap closed at all in the proposal with respect, the material bump is one thing, but is there any gap closing there? Because that's an open question.
Oh, it is, and Lisa and her staff have pulled those data, and we just haven't worked on them the same way I've done with the professional and the support.
We have not prioritized, because that would be a values judgment that we would be making for all of the requests that we put out there. We have taken the perspective that, at least the perspective that I've taken for staff in my direction, was not to try to force upon any of our individual principals to say, well, I need this more than I need that, but to give a clear picture as to what all of our needs are. And if if at any time you want us to give to you our recommendations and our priorities, we were prepared to do that. But I did not want to muddy the water.
No, I guess my question is more to, do we have the full picture with respect to central office staffing needs, central office salary and leadership salary and step increases? I know last year one issue was there was a gap between some of the more senior positions and neighboring jurisdictions that had not been closed in all places. Obviously, we lost several people last year, some to retirement, some to other divisions. We have a great new crop of leaders both in the building and in central office, and I don't want to see them leave because there are disparities as well. So have we right-sized those pieces of the puzzle?
No.
Because I think we should put those into the hopper.
Right. Exactly. And again, some of these are value judgments, and I think, I'll take responsibility for the fact that we're trying to place the school needs above any central office needs at this point. That's what I've been trying to put forward. I certainly could put forward a more aggressive schedule in that area. But hopefully, these are, I don't want to substitute my values and where your values for this community and this budget lie. I will give you my recommendations, but I did not want at this early on of a data dump to you to do anything that would cloud a picture or to influence it.
Yeah, and I just think that, the tooth to tail ratio is important, but I think we've had chronic shortcomings with respect to staffing that I think have ultimate downstream impacts on
Yes,
how
you're
we
absolutely right.
function as a division. And I want to make sure that we are cognizant of what those needs are and we throw those into the mix.
Will do.
Mr. Nkuma?
Can I ask about, and maybe I'm not looking for it in the right place, but can I ask about technology and technology spending?
Next week.
Oh, next week?
Yeah.
Okay.
Anything else? So just kind of laying out the schedule. We have another work session next week on the 24th. That's where the technology conversation will come up, as well as I believe the security, IT, network security, I think will be a part of that conversation as well, if I'm not mistaken. Then we have one on the February 7th. We have a regular meeting on the 14th, of course, public hearing. Well, part of that as well. Making our way towards a date of February 28th to adopt the FY18 recommended budget to head over to the general government.
Mr. Chairman, just a question. One of the things we've done in the past is deploy school board
And I was just going
members
to say,
the buildings.
we need to come up with as we get closer to that February 20th date, and it is going to be very important for us to work with our colleagues on the general government side to stress to them the importance of the budget requests that we ultimately come up with, that every dollar that we are asking for and the importance of it in this year's budget is critical to make sure that our school division stays ahead of the game and competitive with the jurisdiction that around us. So I think we definitely need to do that and come up with that buddy system and set up opportunities where we're going to talk one-on-one with our colleagues and making sure staff providing us with the tools to make sure that when we go talk with them, that we have the data points and talking points that will help them to understand what our budget requests will be.
Are we proposing to do that after we've finalized our budget or before?
I think it would be as we come to some type of agreement, as we talk through these different portions of the budget, I think if we at least start laying a foundation with them before then, I think would be good. The earlier we talk with them, the better I think we may position ourselves. But definitely once we finalize our budget, know what we're asking for, be prepared to meet with your particular council counterpart and have your data points, talking points, and stress to them that we're not asking for anything that is not a need for us in budget. And we recognize that we have limited dollars and resources, but last year we absorbed a pretty hefty cut, and we need to start replacing those dollars that we lost last year.
And I hear you loud and clear, but and maybe I'm not hearing what I want to hear, or I'm hearing nothing from the other across town, but all I'm hearing is any increases are going to the CIP. That's what I'm hearing. And Hunter, you could correct me, but the word is 5 cents this year, 5 cents next year, 5 cents the following year, and all that money is going to the CIP. So what's left for any increases for us and anything else around the city? I don't know. I've heard 2%. I don't even know where that 2% is coming from because, where we generating that from. And for me, this is a non-starter unless the $900,000 that we lost last year is plugged in. That's my baseline. Because we haven't even filled that bucket. So, I mean, if I'm offered $500,000 extra over and above what was approved last year, my thought process is I'm $400,000 short. Because I need that hole filled with an extra 150 kids or whatever we got. I mean, it's, you know what I mean? So I guess, Mr. Chair, I'm struggling with having a conversation with them when we don't know where they're coming from. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, and I think we have at this point, a general idea of where they're coming from, but I think it's incumbent upon us
to share.
To share with them that, we took a hit, and I understand we're recognizing that, particularly on our CAP side, we worked hard to find ways to revise and address some of those issues ourselves without putting in a request for them. I think we're showing some leadership and not necessarily in creating some room, because we do know in the very near future that we're a pretty hefty capital project is going to be coming to our side. So we have made those adjustments, but I think at the end of the day, of making that room for that, I think we need the growth on our operating side as well. But we've taken a hit the last several years, with last year being a significant one. And I would stress that with that hit last year, we are seeing the consequences of that. And that I think hopefully that when we put our budget together and giving additional opportunities for citizens, and particular parents, to have a transparent process that we're trying to have now, that we can bring them back into the fold, to not only us going and making our case, that we have them making our case because they've potentially seen the impact for their students because the cut we took last year, because there was no small dollar amount that we took last year, and I think we're seeing the repercussions across the board from that. Mr. Castillo.
Just a couple of observations, Mr. Chair. One of the things that I think we should not concede is the division of whatever organic growth there is in the budget. I don't think 50-50 split necessarily makes sense if our population is growing an order of magnitude or more than the city population as a whole. So I think the allocation of whatever organic growth there is should be an open question. I think another issue is there is meeting with the city council colleagues. I think we also have to work in our visit to the buildings. Maybe that's been scheduled.
I think that's getting worked on. It was mentioned in our last meeting.
And so how you divide the organic growth wouldn't solve all your problems, but if there are belts to be tightened, then I think Mr. Reidinger did some good work on admin support, computer office support, and other things that suggest that we are running a lean operation. We have a higher growth rate, and that should be factored into divisions of increased amounts.
Mr. Lawrence?
Just a couple things. First, the meetings with council can definitely take place before and always after we do our budget. But the building visits are more key, since we can't visit the buildings after we've passed our budget. That would be horribly received, and rightly so.
Yes.
But to Michael's point, it hadn't occurred to me, in terms of the impact of the cuts from last year, some not having to give $10,000 to the Education Foundation, no impact at all. How many of these have been factored into the budget that we're looking at now? I mean, to get to Michael's point, if you took 900 and, 500 were key, are those 500 put back in to what we're looking at now? Or do we need to basically say, out of that 900, let's say 750 need to go back in, and that's another 750 that we haven't factored into this 4 point whatever number we've already got. I assume some are included in the building requests.
Correct, like the elementary teacher.
Right, but if we're going to say, something had a big impact, we also need to, I think, make sure that we're saying if it had a big impact because it was left out last year, we need to put it in this year and understand that it is in. So it's probably going to be messy because some of it will already have been requested, but I just think we need to make sure that if we said something was an impact last year, we need to make sure it's in our consideration for this year, not just looking and saying, oh man, that was really bad.
And I think the largest part of it fell on the staff compensation. If you look at a single category, and again have tried to lay that out for the board in terms of the history about where we've been year by year, and in terms of a step increase, those sorts of things.
Yeah, no, if it comes down to saying, by hitting the salary, we're taking care of most of the damage last year, that's fantastic, as opposed to saying, okay, now how many extra reams of paper can central office have as opposed to the front office at Mount Daniel? That I would like to avoid, but we just need to make sure that if we wanted it last year, we didn't get it, we had to cut it, and it had a negative impact, that it's back in this year as the baseline to start with. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Anger?
So a few quick things. I think it's probably a little too early to get into the talking points about what the ultimate resolution ought to be. But I agree very much with Mr. Castillo that, there are a lot more dials to turn here than just how much we spend. And I agree with Mr. Lawrence that it's if we're saying things hurt a lot, then we do need to do a crosswalk to make sure that we are refunding in our proposal the things that hurt the most. I'd say in terms of the school visiting schedule, we want to make sure that we get a proposal relatively quickly and get that out to everyone to look at, because we ought to start the visits with staff as soon as possible, especially given the fact that, one, they're time consuming, and two, one of the survey results from last year was that staff did not feel that they were adequately involved in the budget process. So it's really incumbent upon us to go out there and have those conversations. I think we ought to come up with the list of, city council buddies relatively quickly, because there's no time to lose before starting to have those conversations. And I think we all ought to, as we talk about the liaison assignments, which we're going to do shortly, think about what our responsibilities are, not to urge advocacy necessarily, but to make sure that all the SAOs and all the other groups with whom we deal understand the issues that we're wrestling with and have a chance to make their viewpoint heard to both us and the city council. Because it's only when they are all heard that the right decision is made. So I'd like to make sure that we are as open, as rapidly as possible, and as understandable as we are with all of the affiliated organizations with whom we deal. The last thing is, I think we do need to, I would like to think through, and we can talk about this when we have our discussion next week, since we're not going to do the session of responses to public comments. I think we ought to think very strongly about how to speak more clearly to the people of the community about what the options are. Because we all sit around this table for, I wish I should have counted the number of hours we did it last year. And at the end of the day, I think we all had a rough understanding of the budget, but, I had to go back and look through my notes to get anything really detailed. So if there are ways that we could, explore, and I don't know if that is, a real public hearing, or a public forum, or one of those sorts of things, I'd like to work to make sure that we are as open and straightforward as possible. And I think at the end of the day, if we don't come, I've talked to folks last year, if we don't come to a negotiated resolution with the city council about what the transfer payment will be, I still am strongly of the view that we need to send them two proposals. One is what we think we ought to get, what we think we need to meet our requirements, and one is what we get if we get on the guidance. Because what I don't want, we've faced the issue repeatedly, and we saw it again last year, where we say this is what's going to happen if we don't get the money we want, and nobody believes us. At least the city councilmen don't believe us. City council persons, I should say, don't believe us. So I think we need to come up with what a guidance budget looks like as we do the other proposal. And then if, like I said, if the city council gives us exactly what they said they're going to get, then we've got the proposal. We know which arms we're going to cut off, because we want to be responsive to the city council, but we don't get to make the decision about how much money we get. At the same time, we do have a responsibility to be very conservative in what we ask for, because we do know that the money we want is going to go to build a high school. So I mean, that's a lot of sort of disconnected thoughts, but I don't know if I can give you anything more consistent at this point in time.
Just to pick up on that theme, one of the difficulties, I think, is you sort of touched on what I think is an important piece of this exercise, and that is trying to preview what a scenario would be of organic growth. And that'll be difficult because if we ask for A and we get A minus X, then we have to go back and reshuffle everything. But I think we could paint something of a high-level picture of it's going to result in, larger class sizes and some other cascading things, and so that we can at least set expectations, because I think this year is going to be the year, as some council members have said, of the diet. If you want a new high school, you're going to get organic growth. Again, I think we can figure out how to divvy up the organic growth, but if that's going to be the constraint within which we operate, I think it's not really for the benefit of the council that we need to spell that out as much as for the community, because there will be a great deal of interest in what next year looks like if we're operating in that realm, because who knows how many children will show up for school on September 5th or whatever it is. But that'll be a potential sea change to how we function as a district.
Any other comment before? Yes, Mr. Nkrumah.
I'm not trying to throw down the gauntlet here, but I don't see how I start the conversation without clawing back my $932,000 with any city council member. I mean, for me, it's like we had that setting us back, and then we had 150 or 175 kids. I mean, it just doesn't work for me. So I'm here to at least try to get the kids educated. I know we need a new high school, I know we need a new building, but we cannot sacrifice the education. For me, I see what we're doing as sacrifice. Any concessions as sacrificing the current education, which we have a duty to do of the kids, to something in the future. And well, we need money to build a high school. I know we need that, but we also have to educate the kids. And for me, educating the kids now, the way we want to do it, or the right way, for me is more important than the high school. And I'll just put it out bluntly. The kids are here, we need to educate them. Are we going to sort of have this thing that's somewhere in the ether or in the future, hampering what we do now on the kids? And that's the lens through which I'm looking at it. So for me, I want to educate the kids now, figure out how you raise the money and all of that, and it's a consideration. But I don't think we scrimp on what we do now. That's where I'm coming from. So my thoughts. So at least you understand where I come from in the budget process.
Thank you very much. All right, we'll move on to business items that will need approval. And the first one will be 5.01, approval of the school board liaison assignments to advisory committees, and I will turn it over to Mr. Reitinger.
Everyone should have received the proposal. I did my best to meet everybody's requirements, and I apologize that there were a few last-minute changes, but there were some other earlier discussions of which I wasn't aware that were brought to my attention. But I think I've done my best to balance the need to rotate people and give people new assignments, to have continuity where it needs to be there, and to match people with their interests in places where they could most effectively further the schools because of their circumstances or their experience. And so, I haven't heard any objections to this version, and I sent it around. Well, the most recent changes were most recent. They only affected a couple of people. So I'm happy to answer any questions, or we can talk about comments or shuffle people, but that's really sort of the background on where we are. And my thanks very much to Marty for all her assistance in helping to put this together, and to all of you for your patience as I did this for the first time.
Any questions?
Objection.
Not?
Good job, Phil.
If I would entertain a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor, signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you very much. And the second item that we just added, I guess we'll have that 5.02, and that is the conversation that we just had about the tuition increases at Jesse Thackeray Preschool and George Mason High School. Is there?
I think you need a motion.
I know this would be. Okay, I entertain a motion for adding the tuition conversation for Thackeray Preschool and for George Mason High School.
I move to add agenda item 5.02, decision on tuition for George Mason High School and Jesse Thackeray Preschool.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Is there any additional discussion on this before we call a vote?
No, I just wanted to clarify something that I was, when Phil was talking before, I wasn't trying to advocate for not raising the tuition. I mean, clearly we owe a duty to our students who live here in the city, but I just wanted to point out it's just such a shock. It's almost a 20% increase for people who are sending their kids here, and to me that would be a shock. I mean, I don't know what their financial circumstances are, and there's probably a good chance that some of those kids won't be able to continue. But I agree that we do, our first duty is owed to our own students. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Mason.
Mason. At Mason, yeah.
Any other
I
questions,
just-
comments?
Jesse Thacker just confounds me.
Right.
Figure it out.
Entertain a motion for approval.
Approval of. Mr. Chair.
I believe what we discussed was, if anyone would say, maximum at, statutory
I don't know what
maximum
statutory
at
maximum.
at George Mason. And
Phasing.
phase in six to $6,000.
$6,000 next year, and then $7,000
$7,000
in FY 19, Dean. And the increase at preschool will not come as a surprise. I think won't shock
That's for
anybody.
new as well as existing students at Thackeray?
I believe.
Yeah.
I believe so.
Whatever the board wants.
Phase for existing.
I thought it was going to be.
That's why I
phased-
asked.
I thought it'd be phased for existing.
I thought it was,
and a
okay.
full-
Actually, yeah, new would go the 7,000.
Oh.
And for the existing,
Yeah.
Oh, okay,
Phasing.
okay.
existing, it would go up
I
a
was thinking
step.
that everybody would pay 6,000 next year, existing and new, and then the next year, everybody would pay 7,000. That
And
was what I was
there's,
thinking.
and
But
there's,
yeah.
so go ahead.
I'm open to other options.
And there's no reprieve for Mason. It's all out.
I believe so, for Mason. I think for Mason, it's been kind of where it has been
10,000.
for a long while at this point.
Yeah, what are they thinking?
We vote.
I'll take it right
together.
away.
What
We
are
take vote together.
Mr. Chair, I move that we that we increase tuition for students paying tuition at George Mason High School to the statutory maximum as permitted by the Code of Virginia. And I also move that tuition at Jesse Thackeray will be set at $6,000 a year for current students, $7,000 a year for new students, and thereafter $7,000 a year for all students.
Mr. Nkrumah?
Can we have two separate motions?
Or no,
You have to wait.
We can, for this one, we need a,
You can
the second on,
offer an amendment, but you can't have two motions.
yeah,
at
it
once.
has to be the second, first
Then
one.
can I offer an amendment to have two separate
Technically, you
votes?
have to wait for him.
Yeah, right, so, yeah,
Let's start with the
someone has to
second.
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 Yes, someone has to second first. Before you can. Yeah, second one has to second first before then entertaining the amendment. So is there a second to Mr. Castillo's motion?
Second.
Reitinger has seconded the motion. Phil Reitinger.
Mr.
May I make offer an amendment where we have two separate votes? Because I can support one but not the other. So
Oh, I see.
to have a vote on Jesse Thackeray as one and to have a separate vote on George Mason as another.
Well, what's your proposal for Thackeray?
I'd support Thackeray.
No, but
No, no,
at
what-
we all
what-
support Thackeray.
Yeah, I'd support what has been
Chair,
proposed.
how about this? How about I amend my motion?
Mr.
Friendly
Castillo.
amendment, yes.
I would withdraw my prior motion and move that we charge for George Mason High School tuition, which is the statutory maximum, starting for the fiscal year 18-19 year. And we'll leave it at that.
No, all right, 2017, 18 year?
It's actually fiscal year 18.
18. Okay, FY 18.
To be the 2017-18 school year.
For yes question, is there a second to
Second.
this one? Okay.
I have
Ms.
one
Gill.
question about Thackeray. I just want to make sure that we're clear that you're going to have kids there who are paying, 4-year-olds who are going to be paying $6,000 a year for tuition, and 3-year-olds who are going to be paying $7,000 for tuition, all at the same school. Or somebody new joins as the 4-year-old, so you're going to have one person in the class paying $7,000 and one person in the class paying $6,000.
We're just talking
That's
about.
not your, right now, we're just talking about
Right, sure, we're not
Mason.
just Mason. Okay,
we're just
I will
Mason right
reserve
now.
my comment for next one, but keep that in mind.
Okay. All right, it's been moved and seconded to move the George Mason to the statutory max. Although, Mr. Lawrence.
Just one question. Hunter, will this solve your problem about increases? Because if it's at the maximum, then anytime the costs go up, the tuition would automatically go up, right?
That would be true, but I think Dr. Schiller makes a very good point in that this is a decision that needs to be made annually by the school board, and we, as part of the budget, and we need to bring this to the board and inform the board and let them act as part of their budget. And actually, I was going to suggest on Mr. Castillo's earlier motion for Jesse Thackeray, where he said that it remain at $7,000 thereafter, that actually be removed, because that actually relates to FY 19, 20, and beyond.
Unfortunately, we don't have to talk about that yet.
Yes, well, we don't.
You want us to just do it for next year only? Okay, it seemed like his solution was a nice out going forward and not having to revisit it every single year.
Well, we
Well, it will
can
have to
do
be
it either
set.
way.
It will have to be, I mean, you'd have to tell people.
And the board will overturn it if they don't want to.
So I think there's next year to take care of, and then I think there's our process for how we do it thereafter.
Yeah, no, setting it though would be administrative. It wouldn't have to come to us.
True.
If we've instructed him to calculate what's allowable and then to charge that, that's my point. That just seems to make it easier because we're guaranteed it would always be
We could
at
live
the
with that.
maximum.
We could live with that.
I mean, that's what your motion did.
Yeah.
Which I liked. I just wanted to make sure we all understood.
It's a feature, not a bug.
Okay.
So all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Mr. Nkulu? No? The motion carries. 6-1. All right, I will now entertain a second motion with regard to Jesse Thackeray Preschool.
Mr. Chair, I move that the tuition for Jesse Thackeray Preschool for fiscal year 2018 be set at $6,000 per student for students already enrolled and $7,000 for all students thereafter.
Is there a second?
Could you, Mr. Chairman, could you repeat the motion? I'm not sure.
I'll repeat it. I would move that we set the tuition for Jesse Thackeray Preschool for fiscal year 18 at $6,000 for all returning students and $7,000 for any new students.
Is there a second?
Second.
So my comment is that you will have children, 2 kids in the same class. Let's say we're both kids in the preschool class, and I'm paying $6,000. My parents are paying $6,000, and his parents are paying $7,000. I'm just bringing that up because people are gonna say, why am I paying $1,000 more a year than this other kid who's in the same class as me? Because they do have kids who come new as 4-year-olds, So in that case, it won't be that many, but it is a factor just to consider. I just wanted to throw it out. And maybe we just say we don't care, and they can make that decision on their own. They can say, I think it's unfair, and I will leave. So.
I say, it's not that I don't care, but I think there are good arguments to either go to 6,000 or do the divvying up as we've said. And this is definitely one where I'd follow the will of the board. As long as we do, one of those two things to raise the tuition to at least 6,000 across the board, I'm comfortable. So.
Any other comments?
It will only be an issue for 1 year. So.
Well, I would note that my motion only talks about next year, too. So we would have to revisit this the year after, unlike the George Mason motion.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
All right, let's go. All right, motion carries. Thank you all very much. And do you have on for materials for review the agenda for next week's meeting? What's the date that we said if we had any additions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just to refresh everybody's recollection from an email, because sometimes it's hard to keep up with email. The plan is that I think the staff will send around a draft agenda on Tuesday. Is that right, Dr. Schiller?
That's right.
And then we will have a meeting, that is, the chair and I will have a meeting with Dr. Schiller on Thursday, as has been done, to go through the agenda. If folks could get their comments in by, early on Thursday, we could address those in coming up with the final agenda. It'll be then posted, as is always the case. I'm not sure we said we get a draft agenda out, but we said if you want things added to get them in by Tuesday, right? So there could be we could come up with a draft agenda, discuss it, and then we can make adjustments after the fact, but we'd probably only do that at the meeting according to requirements. But the point is, it's the same process we had before, but we'd like to have any board member who wants a specific topic to be discussed to get that in as rapidly as possible after the close of the prior Tuesday's meeting, so we can have all those topics in for looking at for the agenda for the following week. So that's really the one change from prior policy. So It's a request that maybe by, if there's something that you want to talk about next week that will not naturally be on the process, to let us know later tonight or first thing tomorrow morning so that it can be discussed on Thursday this week for next week's agenda. And hopefully that won't be a regular occurrence. But
Wait, I'm sorry, Phil. I thought you said you needed the questions by Thursday morning. Or do you want them tomorrow? I won't be able to.
I have to refresh my recollection of what I said.
I just want to make sure, 'cause I wrote down Thursday.
What you said was you wanted agenda items Tuesday and then questions for things on the agenda Thursday, right?
I believe that actually is correct how it was with the email. Agenda items Tuesday, questions for Thursday.
Okay, thanks.
I think yes, okay.
Oh, items, okay, never mind. I was confusing the two of them. I'm tired.
All right, if there is no other conversation, yes,
Quickly,
sir.
on the
Mr.
agenda. When we say review of technology, are we going to get some supporting documentation? Okay, that's what I want to find out. By the way, question for you, Hunter. Maybe it's not for you, but remember the last audit, semi-audit that was done? The company came, they had a draft report, we had some suggestions as to how to write it. Did we ever get that report?
I'll have to follow up on that.
I never saw a copy of it. Phil, did you?
I didn't see the revised one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, please. It would be good to know that, so at least that baseline's where we are, and if we need to do anything. Okay. All right.
Actually, just before.
Yes, sir.
One thing about IB, what are we going to do to advertise this more? Advertise, publicize, brag about? Because, we had this session, which, very few people were here for, and few will watch it. We had a little thing in the paper, but what are we going to do around the schools? Are we going to get, banners made that people can put up in the front of schools or something like this? It just seems like we're hiding our light under a basket in a fairly absurd way for something that we just accomplished after.
I would agree with you on that. I think it would be
we need to start
good
bragging
to some type of banner on the schools. I think particularly being the only school system in the state that has reached this accomplishment.
The banner is sort of
but at least
an
a starting
easy thing.
starting point. But trying to figure out how do we make sure this gets out to across the region of being with that. So I think
so
that's
talk to John Brett and others, but I think we should be crowing about this.
Yeah,
I think Mary Beth is actually working on getting banners for the schools.
Right, and
Okay,
I think we
good.
maybe
I mean,
look at some
that's
other,
one thing,
but
just to-
other things to kind of get it out
Yeah.
beyond our walls of Falls Church, of letting other folks know that this is something that we've accomplished. And particularly, I think that's something that the George Mason IB diploma coordinator mentioned, of folks who are reaching out to him because of what we have. I think that's where you come in and looking at it of how do you, someone mentioned it tonight, of the advertising of tuition slots that we may have. How do you potentially try to get that information out, that particularly those students who are coming from there, those out of the country there.
About a referral bonus. Let's get some marketing here. I would say one of the places to start is the teacher comments that we received today about IB.
Yeah, those were
Each
great.
one of those is great in its own right, and if there's a way that you could, put one a day in morning announcements for the next few weeks. I think the other thing that we should do as part of this is there's so much great work going on in all the schools every day. I would love if the board would get more information about that on a regular basis, just, some highlights about that, because I think it's great, and disseminate that as well. But that would be a start, would be to take those teacher comments and just, really publicize those.
All right, we stand adjourned.